Good news of the day. Jesus Christ died for our sins, and he has given you eternal life. He loves you infinitely, and he wants you to join him in eternal life in heaven with the Father and the Holy Spirit. You're valuable and important to him, and you have great worth in his eyes. If you're struggling or going through something difficult, you're going to get through it. You're strong. Jesus loves you, and he is with you. He is ready to be accepted into your heart at any time. Ask for forgiveness for your sins and accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, and you will be saved. Please know how loved and special you are and how you're an irreplaceable child of God. Stay strong and take care of yourself. My faith in their writing abilities has been shattered, honestly, possibly past the point of no return, because it's gotten so bad that I honestly am not sure the Fontaine quest will actually be good.
I was frickin' right.
So the last chapter of the Archon quest was absolute shit, right? Like, we're all in agreement. I don't know, I don't interact with the fandom anymore, but like, if we all are not in agreement, y'all need to get your ears and eyes checked. No part of this final chapter works. Literally none. So much so that I had a hard time even attempting to get through my thoughts and articulate them into words, because just so much is wrong. I try to write about one issue in this terrible, story, and then I'd run into another and another issue because the writing in this chapter is so horrendous, and it just keeps getting worse and worse as the chapter continues. It's almost mind-numbing in the sheer scale of its magnificent failure. The ending's writing is so catastrophic, so idiotic, so poorly constructed that calling it constructed at all feels like an insult to works that are actually lovingly constructed, instead of a 10-year-old's crack fanfic that lacks even the most basic concepts of storytelling rules and conventions or just common sense. Because the sheer scale of the failure is so huge and almost every single part of the writing is disastrous, to make sense of it, I have broken it down for you, mostly by the individual characters in the story and explaining how their particular writing was fumbled, and it was all fumbled. Fumbled horribly. So now that we got that out of the way, let's start with this quest's worst sin by far. The mistake that is folklores. So what we've been trying to do for like 4 chapters now in the Archon quest is trying to prevent the prophecy, the flood, which will cover all of Fontaine, dissolve all the Fontainians into seawater, and leave the Hydra Archon crying alone on her throne. Like, that's what we've been trying to stop from coming true. That has been our goal since the beginning of this quest. Yeah, we've had side quests thrown in there, here and there, but the overarching and constantly present main conflict of the Fontaine Archon quest has always been to find a way to prevent the prophecy from coming true and killing all the people of Fontaine, if it's even possible to stop the flood. So, that has been our goal from the very beginning of this quest. Are you following? So then, the 5th chapter comes around, and it's revealed that everything we have done so far, trying to prevent the prophecy from being fulfilled, has just been making the prophecy come true. Now, this in and of itself was not a problem for me. I was like, okay, cool, we're gonna do that tragic thing where fate just can't be changed, like, it's inevitable. I thought that was cool, if sad, and it kind of fit the game's overall fixation on fate, and like one of the main villains of the game, my boy Abyss Prince Aether trademark, being at war with destiny. There's no point at being at war with something that's easily defeated, subverted, or overcome. That would just be silly, and we'll come back to that. So, in my heart, because Genshin almost always pulls its punches and keeps its tone rather light, I really did doubt that all the people of Fontaine would dissolve in the waters, because that's just not the kind of game Genshin is, but there was no other options presented by this point in the story. I'm like, we're in the 5th chapter, so like, we gotta wrap things up, you know? There was just no other options presented to us. And every single thing our main characters had done to try to prevent the prophecy so far hadn't worked. In fact, everything we had done had only done the opposite and further fulfilled the prophecy. So I was like, okay, the prophecy is going to be fulfilled. There's no other way for the plot to be resolved. Then, out of nowhere begins the mistake that is folklores. Folklores is a deus ex machina I want to forget. Also, guys, I want to say real quick, if I'm mispronouncing Focalore's name, I don't care. I don't care about this bitch. You're going to find that out very soon. So I don't care. I may call her Foca later because Focalore is kind of hard to say, and I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but I don't care. So if I'm saying it wrong, I don't care. Anyway, so Focalors is a character that A, appears from nowhere without any prior foreshadowing, B, solves the main conflict of the story super easily, barely an inconvenience, and then dies. We will get to that last part. No, all of it. We will get to all of it. Don't worry, I'm in this for the long haul. Focalors is, by any definition, a deus ex machina. If you don't know, for some reason, a deus ex machina is a plot device whereby a seemingly unsolvable problem in a story is suddenly or abruptly resolved by an unexpected or unlikely occurrence. There was no way for the writers to naturally prevent the flood by this point in the narrative, in Chapter 5, with the pieces that the Hoyoverse writers already set up, meaning that the writers had three potential options. One, they go back and revise what they've already written, so that the main characters, which is Traveler and friends, do have the pieces in place to prevent the flood, and the characters just need to put those pieces together. Two, second option, they go through with the flood like Giga Chads and have all the Fontainian people dissolve in the seawater. If only this entire ending could dissolve in seawater so I'd never have to think about its sheer stupidity ever again. Or three, the writers could pull something directly out of their ass, and they chose the third, laziest, least satisfying, and most fuck you for caring option, and the thing that they produced from their butt to prevent the flood was a character who can't even truly be called that because she's a plot device, a crock of bullshit, a deus ex machina. I'm gonna let you pick which, but like, she's not a character, and that deus ex machina has a name, and it's Focalors. Focalors is never foreshadowed, not even once. It's one of the things that makes her a deus ex machina, as if Focalors was a cleverly foreshadowed and well planned out plot element, we probably wouldn't be here having this conversation right now, or you wouldn't be watching this video essay at 3 a.m. and I wouldn't be frantically typing into my computer or recording this audio right now. Regardless, I'm communicating ideas and you're absorbing those ideas, so therefore isn't this a conversation by definition? Gen Z cope. Anyway, it's never implied, stated, or otherwise hinted or made known to the audience that there is potentially another Hydro Archon. To be clear, it is made known to the audience that Farina is under suspicion of not being the Hydro Archon, and it's also made clear that Nervalet is under suspicion of being the true Archon before it is revealed he is in fact the dragon instead. But there is no foreshadowing at all, none, zippo, zilch, that the Hydro Archon put all of her divinity into something, like an object or something, or split herself into two or more people, or that the Hydro Archon had to try, hide her true consciousness and power, or anything like that. None of those ideas is ever hinted at in the slightest. The only hint we even get at all that something's up with the Oratories is the voice that Linny hears speak to him during his original investigation of it during his magic show, all the way back in Chapter 1. But that didn't foreshadow Focano at all. It lets the audience know, yes, that there's something up with the Oratories, but personally, I had interpreted that voice Linny heard as perhaps the Oratories had gained sentience or something because of all of the emotions of the people of Fontaine being constantly pushed upon it. That is, of course, just one idea I had, but a voice coming from the Oratories does not imply or hint at in any way. Oh my gosh, stay with me because it is indeed confusing as all hell what I'm about to say. It is not implied or hinted at in any way that the Hydro Archon, not the first one that made the Oceanades into people, but the second one who was an Oceanade that the first one made into a person, I think, wanted to outsmart Celestia, so she came up with a convoluted and insane and cruel plan to split herself into two people, one human and one divine. Force her human self. We will get there, I promise. There's so much shit to dissect here. How can you fuck up this badly? Who you're going to inform none of the details of your plan for some reason. We're going to get there. To pretend to be the Hydro Archon, even though she definitely is, or at least half, or was half, we'll get there. While the original Hydro Archon, or not the original, but the second, puts her divine half into a machine, somehow, never fucking explained, and then just chill there for 500 years storing up power so you can kill yourself. None of that was ever implied, you dumb fucks. So Foca comes out of nowhere, and it isn't but rather is undeniably a deus ex machina, and also Foca fuck is terrible writing. It's awful. It's terrible. Which brings us to our next point. Even if foreshadowed, Foca fuck is a terrible idea. I'm going to give you a quick example why. So let's take a story of a group of knights who are going to save a princess. And we spend a long, long time with these knights in this story. I don't know, maybe 4 whole chapters worth of content with them. And the whole time, these knight characters are overcoming obstacles, going on adventures, overcoming emotional issues, and investigating mysteries, but all in service of finding and saving this princess, which is their overarching goal of the entire story. So the last chapter of this knight story finally comes out, and you're so excited to see these knights who you, over the course of the story, have grown to love and care about and feel affection for, finally save the princess and achieve their goal, because that's what they've been working towards this whole time. Then, in the final chapter of the story, when the knights are supposed to be slaying the dragon and saving the princess, a random character who you have never met, say a mage that wears blue, for no particular reason, appears. And this blue mage reveals that all along, she's had all the information and all the power and all the control. And before the knights of the story, whom you've grown attached to, even have a chance to save the princess, the blue mage, nukes the dragon, saves the princess, and then just as suddenly as she appears, she dies. That wouldn't be a very satisfying story, now would it? Well, let's dissect why, because everyone knows that that isn't satisfying, but not everyone can articulate with words why that isn't satisfying. So it's unsatisfying for 2 main reasons. 1, the blue mage is a deus ex machina, but we've already gone over that. But 2, and just as importantly, she was not the hero or heroes of the tale. You as the audience haven't seen the blue mage overcome any obstacles, go through any struggles. You haven't spent any time with her. You straight up don't know who she is. So she feels like an alien invader in the story, robbing the heroes that you do like and you have spent time with and gotten to know and want to see succeed of their well-earned victory. Now, dropping the obvious parallel explanation, the knights here in Genshin's abomination of storytelling called the Fontaine Archon quest are all the characters that we spent extensive time with, got to know, learned about, helped, and saw overcome challenges and experience things throughout the Fontaine Archon quest. Those being Linny, Lynette, Fremine, Navia, Nervalet, Sejuine, Risley, Childe, Farina, the Traveler, Paimon, and Clorand to a lesser extent. Side note, Clorand does make cameos almost every chapter, but her roles are always rather minor, and I feel like I really don't know who she is as a character any better than I did when she first appeared. So, anyway. I wanted, and I'm sure other members of the audience felt the same way, they wanted to see the knights, which are our knights, the characters that we had grown to love in Fontaine, find a way to stop the flood, or to have the flood happen, but still find a way to save people or as many people as they could, or deal with the aftermath of the flood happening. Whatever was the ending of our tale, I wanted to see it. And I'm sure others share these sentiments, that the characters I knew well and I was fond of, I wanted to see them be the ones to save Fontaine or fail to save it. I wanted to see the end of their story. Focalors is the blue mage. I don't know her. The writers didn't give me a chance to meet her. If they wanted her to be part of the story, the most important part of the story, by the way, they had 4 chapters to introduce me to her and allow me to spend time with her and care about her. The writers chose not to do that. And, why? They chose to not introduce her until minutes before her death and moments before she saves everyone with less screen time than maybe Mona in this Archon quest. It's a waste, and it's insanely unsatisfying. It would be like if in the Mondstadt Archon quest, instead of Venti, Jean, Diluc, Traveler, and Paimon taking on Dvalin, Zhongli just showed up when we had never even met him up to this point in the story, beat Dvalin, and then died. What? It would feel awful, and it did feel awful, because that is what happens in this quest. It is genuinely one of the most baffling, horrible, nonsensical, idiotic writing choices I have ever seen, and I have read and consumed, unfortunately, some truly awful, awful media. This is coming from a woman who has survived 2 entire seasons of Riverdale, and trust me when I say that even Riverdale wouldn't pull this shit. They would not make a writing mistake this grave and nonsensical, and that show is barely comprehensible. So, speaking of Focano, let's talk about her swift and sudden exit from the story, which is as off-putting and ridiculous as her abrupt and unwanted entrance. Focaloser died, and I feel nothing. Focalor's death means nothing to the audience because we don't know her nor her motivations. She makes it explicitly clear that she's not Farina, and she acts pretty much nothing like Farina. That said, we barely know Farina, so yeah, her death means nothing to us. How can you expect us to mourn or give a single shit about a character's death when they've been on screen for less than like 5 minutes? And no, I don't know the exact amount of time she was on screen. It's not much, I'll tell you that. I think it's around 12 minutes. But anyway, I don't care. And did the writers, not want us to care about her? Why have a character die if their death has no emotional impact on the audience? Even when a villain dies, you want the audience to feel something. Abject apathy is about the worst possible thing you could make your audience feel. If the Hoyoverse writers didn't want her death to feel bad because they wanted the audience to be happy that Nervalette was getting his full power restored, I wasn't. We'll get to the dragon in his judge robes later. But if the Hoyoverse writers didn't want to make him getting his powers back bittersweet by having a character we actually liked die to give it to him, they could have just, made it so that the character gifting him his power didn't have to die. The writers made that choice, not us. So the whole thing makes no sense and is seriously off-putting and bizarre. This super powerful character makes an entrance, fixes everything instantly that every other character we actually care about has been trying to fix for the last 4 chapters, and then that super powerful character just dies just as suddenly as they appeared. That is Foca in one sentence, and it is truly, truly baffling and nonsensical. It's dumb. It's super, super dumb. Focalor's plan makes no sense and is not well explained to the audience. She says she's going to destroy the Hydro Archon's throne, and that will somehow return all Hydro power to Nervalette the Hydro Dragon. But first off, 1, what the fuck is the Hydro throne? Is the throne a physical object? Is it her, Focalors herself? If it is her, she still exists, or half of her anyway, as Farina. So how does that work? We know that if a god who was the old Archon dies, their throne, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't disappear. Example, when Decarabian dies, Venti Barbados takes up the Anima Archon throne. Another example, when Makoto dies in the Cataclysm, A takes up her position and presumably her throne after her death. So, what is an Archon's throne? It's not the Archon themselves. We've just established that Archons can die and have died in the past multiple times, and their thrones, whatever the fuck that is perfectly intact. The seat of the throne is just taken up by another person. And it also doesn't appear to be a physical object. As far as we know, Focano didn't destroy any physical objects, just herself when she destroyed the Hydro Throne, unless her big energy sword somehow flew all the way to Celestia, entirely off-screen, by the way, and destroyed some kind of object there, which would, be insane. So the audience doesn't know what a throne is. I still don't. So we can't possibly understand what Focalors even did in her final sacrifice, which is a big fucking problem because her decision to destroy the throne is literally the most important decision made in the entire plot of the story. I feel like I'm not getting across how insane this is. The biggest decision of the entire Archon quest, the only reason that the people of Fontaine, some of them anyway, we're going to get there, are saved is because of Foca Fuck's decision to destroy the throne of the Hydro Archon and return full power of the Hydro element to Nervalette. And we literally just do not understand what the fuck was done. We just don't understand the plot. The plot is not explained to us. Yes, we know that Focus destroyed the Hydra throne, but we're not told what the fuck that even means. I can have a character say and do anything in a story, but if the bigger context is not explained adequately to the audience, or if the idea is not conveyed with enough detail, the audience literally will not know, not what literally happened, but what that means. Let's give an example. I have a character in a fantasy setting start shooting fire from their hands. But until I tell the audience the rules of the fictional world, the rules of the magic system in said fictional world, how many other people within this fictional setting can shoot fire from their hands, if any, how fire is shot from the hands, the audience lacks understanding. They know my character just started shooting fire from their hands, just as I now know, against my consent, that Foca, whatever her name is, destroyed the Hydro Throne in the fictional setting of Teyvat. But until they and I am informed of the surrounding context and detailed, and yes, let's call it what it is, world building, we don't know what that means. We know that it happened, but we don't truly understand what happened. Are you following me? Let's just digest the insanity of this. We, as the audience/players within the Genshin story, do not understand the very plot of the game. And that is not our fault. Unless you're reading something that's purposefully supposed to be obscure or mysterious or ambiguous, or you read or ingest work without your attention and focus being on it, it's not the audience's fault if they don't understand something. It is the writer's job to explain it to you in a way that you can comprehend. When you write a story and give it to others to enjoy, you are communicating that story with them. And if something is unclear within that story, that isn't the reader's fault because they aren't a gosh darn mind reader. It's your fault as the author because you didn't convey the ideas in your mind well enough down on paper so that others could understand what you were trying to say. This is one of the most basic, fundamental, elementary school things you learn about writing. One of the first things you check about a piece of writing is it even comprehensible? And this shit is pretty much incomprehensible. If I have to do homework to understand a story, it's a badly told story. Very quickly, I wanted to address the fact that if this destroying throne nonsense is explained in detail in any in-game books, artifact descriptions, weapon descriptions, obscure world quests, or any world quest, that doesn't justify it at all, and it is still bad storytelling. Everything within a story should be understandable just from someone reading it / enjoying it / playing through it, etc. So I'm not sure if it's explained how Celestia / Celestial Thrones, Archon Thrones, whatever, I'm not sure if that is explained in other parts of the game. I do know that Hoyoverse does like to hide lore in artifact sets and weapons and stuff like that. I'm not sure if that's the case here. I suspect not. But if it is, I wanted to let you know that that doesn't justify the slapdash storytelling here. It's not fair to your audience to expect them to do homework just to enjoy your story or like even fucking understand your story. It just means you wrote a bad story. So whatever context and or lore the audience needs to fully understand the tale should be present within the story that they're currently experiencing. Beyond good storytelling, that's just basic common sense. Why does focus stop destroy the throne? Another thing that's not as egregious because we apparently don't even have the basics of writing down, but I would argue is also important, also a pretty damn big mistake, is the fact that we as the audience have no idea, I mean literally virtually none, as to why Focalors decided to destroy the Hydro Throne. Now again, on a surface level, we know why. She's destroying the Hydro Throne so that she can restore full control of Hydro back to Nervalette, which why it works that way makes no sense, we'll get there, so that he can, through absolute bullshit, we'll get there, turn the people of Fontaine's blood into primordial seawater into real blood so that they can be saved from dissolving into seawater upon being touched by the primordial seawater. Are you following? It's simple. What are you complaining about? Yes, obviously this is convoluted, but putting aside how convoluted it is, it somewhat makes sense, sort of, we'll get there. Focano is basically destroying the throne to give Nervalette power so that Nervalette can save her people. And she's pretty confident that he's going to save her people because he spent the last several hundred years around humanity every single day at her suggestion. So she's pretty confident he won't just, like, kill them all, which, like, I think is okay. If I were to nitpick, which, like, why not? I'm already here. I am wondering how much Focalo could see from inside the Oratrice, because if she could see everything, then would she see him, like, slowly change over time and then, like, see him warm towards humans? But like, then again, can she only see him in the opera house because he'd be working then? And if that's the case, she wouldn't really get to see his opinion change too much because it's told to us that Nervalette has always been impartial. That's always been the same, at least as far as we're told. But maybe she could, like, see him softening towards humans or something. I don't really know. Yeah, it's never really explained how she knows that he really changed. But okay, I mean, I buy this part well enough. She is, like, all divine, and it's never really said, but she still has her divinity at this point in the story, so I'm guessing that Focalors has some kind of omniscience or something, and maybe she saw Nervalette put that big fancy seal on the primordial sea within the Fortress of Meripede. So if she saw that, which is an okay assumption to make, I think, then she would know without a doubt that Nervalette would, like, save her people with the power that she's giving him, so that's fine. But it still leaves the question of, why like this? Why save her people like this, at the expense of her own life? Was there really no other way? We only spend a few minutes with her, but we certainly don't hear her say something like, I spent years agonizing through all the outcomes, but this is the only one that would work, or I took a long time to accept it, but in the end I knew you were the only one who could save my people. It's an insanely grave choice to make, and because we lack lines like that, we really don't know what pushed Focalors to make the choice she did. Sure, it very well could be that it was her only option, and while that's sort of implied, it's never really said. Then again, there is the fact that she's choosing her natural enemy, the Dragon of Hydra, to do so, so, like, you would assume she has no other options, and she's literally gonna die. But, like, again, So, like, let's get back to her giving the dragon power. So it's a pretty damn extreme choice to make, right? And it makes me wonder if there was some kind of like scrapped backstory for Focalors, like she always felt pity for the dragons, or maybe even scandalous love for the Hydro Dragon in particular. Ooh la la, spicy, let's go. And like maybe that backstory or something about that got thrown away, and like maybe due to time constraints or something. Although, if 5 chapters and an awful ending enough to sour the whole of them in retrospect, you would think the whole universe didn't have any qualms about wasting our precious time. But anyway, I just think that we as the audience should understand why Focalors was making the choice that she did make. What caused her to trust Nervalet so much that even before he softened to humans, she already had planned to put her people's fates in his hands? I mean, how was she so confident he would change? What caused her to make a plot that literally involved her own death? Sheer desperation, benevolence for her people? We're literally never told. In her speech to Nervalet, she doesn't seem all that worried about her people, or she doesn't talk about how she loves them, and she doesn't make a promise, like, she doesn't make him promise to take care of them for her or anything of that sort. So while you could guess at her love for her people, since she did, die for them, it's nothing that's explored or even really hinted at. Heck, Focalors seemed more concerned with fooling or getting the one-up on Celestia in her speech to Nervalet than she expressed concern or love for her people. And if that was supposed to be her motivation to going through such insane lengths, like not her love for dragons or love for her people, but her spite against Celestia, that could be interesting too. But once again, I mean, the writers didn't even take the time to explain what Focalors even did, so I guess them taking the time to communicate basic first-grade character motivations to us would just be a pie-in-the-sky request. How silly of me. Why couldn't Focano save her people herself? Is she just crazy weak? Sorry, I know we're spending a lot of time on this bitch. It's just there's a lot of different issues with her. I don't think I've ever seen a character where so much is done wrong and so little is done right. And by little, I mean nothing. Nothing's done right. So just to be clear, Nervalet doesn't stop the flood. It's pretty much stated that no one can, although I feel like that's cap, but whatever. Nervalet just turns the people's primordial seawater blood into real blood somehow. We're going to get there. And the BS explanation he gives for how this is possible is basically his full authority over the element of hydro, which that's still BS for a lot of reasons, but whatever. Taking the game at face value and accepting that absolutely ridiculous premise that the game itself put forward that someone with great or perhaps full control over the hydro element is able to turn seawater into blood. Just go with it. That's taking the game's own logic at face value. Why couldn't Focalors do this herself? Why did she have to empower Nervalet to do it? As far as we know, Focalors has full power over Hydro before she killed herself. And she even had a Gnosis, which are just like basically jumbo power sources to channel the elements through. So like she had that to help her as well. And so, and she's like a freaking god of Hydro. She's like full divine at that point. So like, I would imagine she would have full or at least very impressive control over the Hydro element. And literally, like, speaking of her divinity, unlike Farina, who's separated from her divine power, like, Focano is literally completely divine. She says, quote unquote, that all the human parts of her were taken out and put into Farina. So therefore, Focalor should be like the most divine god to ever divine in the world of Tevat. And yet, she's unable to turn seawater into blood like Nervalet is when he's at full power. Now, if there was an explanation for this in the game, like, Focalors was bound by Celestia so she couldn't, which seems insanely unlikely considering she wasn't bound from destroying the Hydro Archon throne, whatever that means. But, like, still, I'm sure whatever happened, Celestia is not approving of it. But, like, if there was some kind of explanation, like, for example, because Focalors isn't native to Tevat, and the element of Hydro is native to Tevat, and Nervalet is a native of Tevat, and therefore he's more powerful with Hydro because his nature is a being of Tevat while she's an outsider. I don't know if that made any sense, but like that would be one thing, but there is no explanation given in game as for why Focalors can't do what Nervalet did. And like that's an issue, obviously. Just once again emphasizing how little information was actually conveyed to us about her abilities, her actions, and her choice. It is true. I mentioned a little block of text a little bit ago. She says like this was the only option, but like we're not told why. Like we know so little about her, about what she can do, about how the world even works, about how the magic systems work, that like her choice just comes off as like completely random. And I'm gonna call cap, because if it was just that she wasn't powerful enough, or her control over hydro element was so weak that she couldn't turn the seawater into real blood herself, I mean, that's just hella cap. We've seen Archons do absolutely insane feats in this game, many of which happened before the game properly begun, like Zhongli throwing rock spears so big they make up the Guyan stone forest, or Venti blowing away all the ice and snow that Boreas inflicted upon the land and literally reshaping all of Mondstadt in the process. Like, I feel like we don't talk about that enough. Like, Venti used the wind to blow a mountain into the sea. But some of these crazy feats of strength by the Archons are done during the event of the game themselves, such as A surrounding all of Inazuma with a continuous horrific lightning storm that, like, killed most people who attempted to get in or out of it. I mean, an entire nation, 7 entire nations, A continuously surrounded with that electrostorm. So, like, the power on display there is almost incomprehensible. And yet you're saying the Hydro Archon with a Gnosis in her possession, and canonically who had all the humanity stripped out of her, leaving only the divine, that Folklores lacked sufficient control over the hydro element to turn the people's seawater blood into real blood. Wow, Nervalette does this easily. That seems like hella cap. This seems like the worst sin an author can commit, which is a because I said so kind of moment. We aren't given an explanation for why Nervalette can do this, but Folklores can't, and like that's a sin that breaks all immersion for the audience and makes everything seem very arbitrary. Like, why can Nervalette change the seawater blood into real blood, but Folklores can't? Well, because plot. And that's not good storytelling, it's a bad fan fiction. Moron says she's fooling the gods, or whatever, Celestia or whoever, by having Farina pretend to be the Hydro Archon for 500 years. But how the fuck does this work? I literally just don't understand this, and once again, the writers fail in having the audience literally understand what is happening within the plot. This is the most basic reason, like, why I don't understand this plot point. We don't know what Celestia can see. What can Celestia see? What do they even do? What even are they? We have exactly 0 concrete information on Celestia. To my knowledge, we only know a handful of things about them. 1, we know they committed the cataclysm against Conria. 2, it's implied that they destroyed both the dragon spine civilization of old and also the fact that they sunk the original people of Enconomia down to the depths with bishops for some reason. And, like, those second 2 points you would only know if you played World Quest. Anyway. And we also know that there is this being called the Unknown God who is the enforcer of heavenly principles. And, like, it's implied she's from Celestia. But, like, we've never been told what these heavenly principles are or what constitutes violating them or if they're from Celestia, like, at all. Which, like, it's implied that they are, but whatever. It's also implied within the end of the Sumeru Archon quest that Nahida believes that if she breaks the Gnosis, then perhaps the Unknown God will show up, or Celestia will in some other way retaliate. But this is just her suspicion. Nahida literally says she's not sure what would happen if she destroyed the Gnosis, so, like, that's just a guess, basically. We also have been told on many occasions that fate in the world of Teyvat is something binding and real, and something you can't stray from. Mona even talks about how in the second summer quest, basically fate can't be changed. And up until this point in Genshin, that's been a pretty established rule that fate within Teyvat is binding. It's insurmountable, one might say. Now, even knowing all of that, we're really not sure how much Celestia actually has to do with fate to begin with. It's not a huge leap in logic to imagine that Celestia possibly controls fate and that they have something to do with it because they're like these godlike entities that are considered even more powerful than the Archons. But we still never have been told in stone that the gods of Celestia write fate. Like, they sit down and write it in a notebook. And speaking of that, we're not even sure what Celestia really is. Like, we know that it's a floating island in the sky, but, like, or it appears to be a floating island in the sky. But, like, is this an island you can reach just by flying high enough? Is it something you have to reach via passing into another dimension or through some kind of, like, divine teleportation system? That's never been addressed. And even more damning than that is the fact that we don't actually know what's on Celestia or who is on Celestia. They're often referred to as gods, but we've never actually seen any of the gods from Celestia except the Unknown God who we meet at the beginning of the game. And like I said, it's just kind of implied she's from Celestia. I don't think that's ever explicitly said. I mean, I do assume that she is, but anyway. And we've never seen her again since then. So, is there just a single goddess on Celestia? Is it her? Are there many different gods and goddesses? Do they make some kind of council up? Is Celestia some crazy advanced AI supercomputer from a spaceship from a different dimension or outer space? Like, all of these interpretations are equally valid because we've never been told pretty much anything about Celestia except that they like to, on occasion, destroy nations or send them to Bishop Town. So, like, why they do this, we're not even really told. Like, we literally know nothing about them. And I think it's not an insane assumption to make is perhaps they punish nations who play with slash are infected with forbidden knowledge, because we find out within the Sumeru Archon quest and also Nihida's second story quest that forbidden knowledge can corrupt and corrode all things and it will keep spreading. So maybe Celestia was like destroying those civilizations like Conria because they were infected with forbidden knowledge. Think of like cutting off a diseased limb before the infection spreads to the whole body and kills the host. But like, that's just an assumption I made that I think is reasonable with the facts we have provided. But, like, in fairness, we don't have a lot of facts that are provided, and we don't have a lot of insight into what Celestia is, what Celestia's goals are, what the heavenly principles are, and, like, we just know nothing. We know pretty much nothing. So, going back to our original point, when Foka is able to deceive the gods, assumedly from Celestia, how does she do this? Is Celestia always watching? Because if they are or have some level of omniscience, then they should very easily be able to see through her ruse. If they're omniscient or they can just see almost everything, then they should very clearly be able to see her separating herself into two people, a human half and a divine half. Not to mention, if they couldn't see that, then when Farina is attacked by the knave, if they saw that, then the jig is up and they know that she's not actually the Hydra Archon. Also, assuming that Celestia missed those two incidents, what about any time within the 500 years that Farina played her role? Like, did Celestia never get suspicious, not even once, that Farina never uses her Hydra abilities at all within that time period, or do anything divine at all? Because if so, then Celestia is absolutely retarded, and that makes no sense, and that's bad writing. And then we also have the other option, which is basically the opposite, which is the conclusion that instead of being omniscient, Celestia just doesn't watch Teyvat at all. And this seems more likely to me, as I don't know if Celestia hasn't noticed or something, but Teyvat's been going pretty crazy recently. The Tsaritsa's been stealing Gnosis's left and right, sometimes through consensual contracts, but sometimes just through outright theft. And there's been maniacal puppets trying to overthrow Archons and Hydro Archons nonsense, and a literal dragon gaining supreme power over the Hydro element, and for some time possessing a Gnosis. Like, there's been all these like insane changes to the status quo, and yet Celestia just like doesn't seem to notice or be concerned or make any noticeable action to put things back in their proper order, or even they don't even seem to observe what's happening in Teyvat. There's no evidence that they do. So from what it looks like Celestia literally just doesn't watch Teyvat at all. And perhaps they'll only interfere if a Gnosis is destroyed, as Nihida seems to think is possible. But if this is the answer, it certainly has less plot holes, but like not none, because if Celestia is never watching, why does Focalors do all the insane shit that she does, including torturing Farina by making her play pretend for 500 years? Like, there's no need to force Farina to pretend to be the Hydro Archon if Celestia isn't fucking watching. So that implies that Focalors clearly thinks that Celestia is watching. But like I said earlier, if Celestia is watching, then why aren't they doing anything? And why can't they see through her ruse sooner? Because, like I said, it's not that good of a ruse. I mean, was Celestia really not suspicious of the fact that, once again, Farina doesn't show any divine ability or even control over the Hydro element for 500 years? Are they not concerned about the Oratrice itself collecting so much energy, probably far beyond a nuclear bomb, and just holding on to most of it and not actually using that power to, like, power Fontaine? Does none of that raise suspicion for Celestia? So the answer we're left with is basically Celestia does watch sometimes, but not always, and only when it's convenient for the heroes, and not when it's not convenient. Then Celestia doesn't watch. Yeah. This is obviously a giant crock of bullshit. So once again, we lack just basic world building so that we cannot even understand the events unfolding. Although, like I said, the only real way that Focus Plan makes sense and is necessary, and but like the only way her plan could both make sense, be necessary, and work is if Celestia is incredibly inconsistent and dumb, which is not very good. Like, if the only way your story makes a lick of sense is by having a huge entity within the story be inconsistent and stupid, then you need to rewrite your story. Because, I mean, the plot holes are everywhere, and the sense of disbelief that you've asked the audience to give it's been shattered. It's been shattered, and yeah, like, basically, the writers of Hoyoverse, they need to go get some help. Like, this is beyond awful. Why is overcoming destiny easy now? Now let's go over another thing. The characters did defeat destiny in this quest, if you go by what's being shown on screen. We're going to get to some of the basic logical issues with what's being shown on screen later in the video. But if you're going strictly by what's shown on screen, then Focalors, Nervalette, and Farina were able to defeat destiny within this finale. The prophecy doesn't state that a flood will come and cover all of Fontaine. The prophecy is very specific, and it says that Fontaine will be covered with water, all the Fontaine people will be dissolved within that seawater, and the Hydro Archon will sit alone crying on her throne. Now, the flood does happen, and Farina does sit alone crying on her throne, but one of the biggest elements of the prophecy, which is that all the Fontainian people dissolve into seawater, is not fulfilled at all, because Nervalette uses his BS powers to give people real blood so they don't dissolve. So, Mrs. Deus Ex Machina, Water Bimbo, and Justice L'Oreal just defeated fate. Like, no cap, they did it. And you could argue they only partially defeated fate because the flood still happened and Farina does cry on her throne, but in the end, a huge element of the prophecy was still subverted. The people didn't dissolve in the seawater. So this leaves the obvious question, is getting around destiny just easy then? I mean, seriously, you could argue, no, defying fate isn't easy. Defying fate in this case took a super complicated plan. It took 500 years to complete this plan. It took the Hydro Archon sacrificing herself to even partially defy fate. And like, okay, yeah, you could say that, but you could also turn the other way and actually say that this whole hot mess of defying fate was actually relatively easy for them. Vocalors does this plan basically by herself, with Farina as her little brainless obedient helper and Nervalette as an ally. But other than Farina and Nervalette, she does it by herself. Vocalors doesn't even go out of her way to give Farina like hydro powers or like give her some kind of an illusion to convince people she's divine. No, she literally just tells a human girl to act like the Hydro Archon. That's all she does with Farina. And as for Focalors, I'm assuming making the Oratrice was possibly a little difficult, but after she completes the Oratrice, she just climbs inside of it and then just chills for like 500 years. The people of Fontaine naturally want to go to the trials and they have a belief in justice, so all Focalors has to do is wait passively inside the Oratrice as the people of Fontaine power it up, and so like she basically just has to wait around and store up power basically. Vocalors' other incredible labor is basically sending a letter to Nervalette, which makes me wonder, like, did he have an address? Or, like, did she send it in the mail? Does he have a mailbox? Whatever. And then Nervalette had to accept the letter to come be the judge and then come live in Fontaine or whatever. Which, like, he does, but we don't really get to see if this was hard. Like, if Vocalor had to put extreme effort to convince or control him into doing this. In Nervalette's CP story, it just states that he gets the letter and then immediately comes to Fontaine and the rest is history. So there's no long period of him like being hounded by her or being somehow cleverly manipulated into accepting the position of Eudex and come live in Fontaine. Like there's nothing like that stated. Vocalors pretty much just asks him and he accepts and then that's it. Like that's 3 steps and Vocalors was able to defy fate. She made Farina pretend to be the Hydro Archon with, like, no effort, basically. She was just like, just pretend to be her. And then she wrote Nervalette a letter. Like, what an insane labor that was. And then she built the Oratrice, and then she stored up power inside of it for 500 years. That's 3 steps. And remember, no one else in the story, other than Vocalors and technically Farina and Nervalette, actually do anything to stop the prophecy. Like, everything that all the other characters that we actually like do, Not that I dislike Nervalette, really. But, or Farina for that much, but whatever. Folklores is, like, basically the ringleader. They're just, like, her little minions. So, but everything that everyone else does that is trying to stop the prophecy, it just leads to that prophecy being fulfilled. So those are the only 3 characters that take an active role in subverting fate. Vocalors, Farina, and Nervalette. And Focalors literally was the only one who, like, consciously made this plan and, like, did the most stuff. So it took Focalor 2 alloys and 3 things to defy fate. And Nervalette even got a sweeter deal. He defied fate only through doing one thing. When he got his powers back by doing literally nothing, he was literally just given them back. He just had to decide not to kill everyone, and then somehow through the power of BS, make all the seawater blood into real blood, which doesn't appear to strain him in any way or appear difficult or challenging. Nervalette just does this pretty much instantaneously and effortlessly. So while you could make an argument that this plan was 500 years in the making and it involved all this lying and trickery, I would make the counter argument that the plan is actually exceedingly simple and involves only about 3 to 4 steps depending on how you want to count them. Especially considering that Folklore, Nervalette, and Farina, because of her extended lifespan, are all immortal or at least ageless, so 500 years is not even that long a time to them. Now it is to Farina because for some reason, Folklores had her memory wiped, so 5 centuries to Farina felt like a long time to her, but to an ageless / immortal being, it probably doesn't feel that long. So I would argue that Foca's plan to beat fate was actually relatively simple, had minimal steps, and was completed in a relatively short amount of time. She was basically able to defy fate, fool Celestia, and pretty much accomplish every single thing that she wanted, even though up until this point, fate was something that was pretty much treated as something insurmountable in the world of thought. So, like, Folklores basically defeated fate, like, pretty dang easily overall. In my opinion, being able to overturn destiny in such an easy way trivializes the whole concept and theme and intimidating force that fate plays in the narrative up to this point. It basically makes it appear as if defying fate is actually pretty easy and can be done with just a little cleverness and some preparation time. And I personally think, like, that's dumb. I think if they were going to have something about defying fate within the story, especially considering how much emphasis has been placed on fate within the Genshin storyline, I think it should have been much, much, much more challenging. And perhaps our characters should have had to give up a lot more to change fate. Because as it is now, defying fate into bot seems really easy, barely an inconvenience. And, like, that's lame. That's really lame. But, like, since that's what the writers have established, that defying fate is actually easy, like, that moves us on to our next question. Why hasn't Abyss Prince Aether beaten fate yet? As we just established, you could say that overturning fate and in Fontaine was extremely difficult and took a lot of time and planning, and Folklores and her friends were only able to partially subvert the prophecy anyway. But as I've already explained just a moment ago, I actually think it was relatively easy for them to overturn fate. And in case you have forgotten, one of our main villains within the game's whole goal is that he, or she, if you play with Lumine as the princess, is that he's at war with destiny and he wants to overturn fate and topple the thrones of Celestia. Well, Foca was able to not just defy fate, but literally nuke one of the thrones of Celestia, or whatever nonsense that means. So, and she did this relatively easy with some preparation time, some very, very bad deception. If you want to know how bad their deception was, the Knave Immortal started to suspect that Farina wasn't the actual Hydra Archon after having a total of 1 interaction with her and writing a letter. So, like, if it was that easy for Foca, why hasn't Prince Aether of the Abyss just, like, won by now, or at least made substantial progress through his goal of defeating Destiny? You know, at least nuke a throne or 2. He's ageless / immortal, so he has all the time in the world, and we don't have any reason to believe he's an idiot, so why hasn't he just, like, won already, or at least made significant progress in doing so? The Hydra Archon nuked her throne with, like, 3 steps and a few hundred years, and my man Aether does nothing every day but think about reversing the curse on his people and destroying the thrones of Celestia and defying fate. So it kind of feels like he should have made some progress by now, considering that it's relatively easy to defy fate in this universe, because Hoyoverse really didn't think through their own story and the implications of that. So this means 2 things for the narrative. 1, either Aether's just an idiot and that's the reason he can't do what Foka was able to do. And if that's true, then he's not a good villain, not a good character, and that's not an interesting direction to take the story. Obviously, I mean, that's just not good writing. Answer as to why Aether hasn't at least destroyed like a single throne of an Archon being, well, because he's dumb. Like, that's obviously not a satisfying answer. It's not good storytelling. Two, you could argue that maybe Aether doesn't have the pieces that Foka had in order to defy fate. And a reminder, the only pieces that Foka had were A, her divinity, B, Nervalet's funky ass, and C, a human with an extended life willing to badly perform an acting role. Now, as for A, this is the only valid point against Aether making any progress in his goal. Foka got him beat there. She's divine. He's not. That makes sense. Aether is not a god. And unless he wants to pull a Mushi, then there's no way for Aether to easily become a god. Although there was that plan for the Abyss Order to make a mechanical god, which we saw back in the first Dane quest, which I think would be really cool if that plot element ever came up again. Like, the writers just kind of forgot about that, but like, they could try again, even though it didn't work the first time. And that was super cool. So I would like to see that in the future. But anyway, because apparently with the evidence presented in this quest, to defy fate in Teyvat, you do need some level of divinity, or at least that's what's been presented so far in the narrative. So Foka has got my man beat there. Like, but to counter this, I could basically come up with a reason like, why can't Aether just try to work with an Archon? Like, I don't know, literally Focalores on the process of defying Celestia. I mean, like, we hardly know anything about Focalores, but she seemed to really want to spite Celestia and trick them, so maybe she would have been sympathetic to his goals. And it's a pretty reasonable assumption, I guess you could say, that Aether wouldn't want to work with Archons since he hates their guts, but it is something to consider. I mean, we know that the Archons will occasionally like rebel against Celestia. I mean, whatever the Tsaritsa's doing is kind of like in rebellion against Celestia. We haven't been like explicitly told of her motives, but the Fatui basically laugh in the face of like fate and the gods and the world. So like it's pretty heavily implied that Tsaritsa has beef with Celestia. So like why couldn't he try to work with her? And like yeah, maybe he hates the gods, but like I don't know. This is the weakest point, but like I still say it's fair. But as for what's not a valid point, is Aether not going to the dragons for help on his quest to destroy Destiny or defeat Destiny, or go to war with Destiny, whatever? Because Nervalet hates the Archons other than Foka. In his voice lines, he talks about how he's going to like settle the score with them and fight them and judge them and they have to pay for their sins. Like it's very charged language. So Nervalet hates them. And before Foka really called him up and was like, hey, come chill in Fontaine with me, he was just out there like living in the wilderness, I guess, question mark, or maybe like the Bishop realm. We're not really sure like where he was or what he was doing. It's just said that she writes to him and she was like, hey, want to come live in my country? And for reasons we're even not really told, what a shocker, he says yes. So why couldn't Aether in the 500 years he's just been running around trying to topple the thrones of Celestia, why couldn't he contact Nervalet or like another dragon of similar power and be like, hey, you want to help me in my plans? We know that there are dragons just still chilling on Teyvat. The Dendro dragon is literally just chilling in the desert and she hates people and Archons, so like she'd probably be willing to help him try to get revenge on Celestia. And then there's Nervalet, as we've already mentioned, but like there's also Dvalin and Astaha. And you could say they already tried to work with Dvalin, they being the Abyss Order, but that wasn't exactly a willing partnership situation. It's pretty heavily implied that the abyssal infection that they had in his neck was distorting his thoughts and making him do things he wouldn't normally do. And so I wouldn't exactly call him a willing participant in their crimes. So he wasn't an ally as much as he was a victim. So obviously the Abyss did try to use Dvalin, but because it was more of a victim thing, it wasn't going to be as effective as a full willing partnership would be. And now they've obviously burned that bridge with Dvalin. They barely even really tried to keep control of that asset because the Abyss Order is dumb, as previously established, I guess. Because, like, when Venti, Diluc, Jean, Traveler, plus Paimon show up to, like, fight Dvalin, the Abyss Order doesn't even provide Dvalin with support. Oh, my brain. That's right. The writing of the Fontaine Archon quest is so abysmal. Get it? Get it? Abyss Order. It's making me go back and find new issues with the old material that I had never questioned before. Anyway, I digress. Astaha would be a good choice as a dragon ally for the Abyss because he's kind of got the side of him that's good, but he's also got the side of him that's really fucking crazy and kind of wants to kill all of humanity. So, like, why didn't the Abyss just hit him up, The point is, For the dragons being defeated, there's a lot of them just kind of hanging around on Devat, and they're really freaking powerful if Nervalet's anything to go by. So Aether should have just like hit one of them up, if he actually wanted to win. So there's also that time the Abyss Order tried to bind Boreas to do their bidding, but Boreas won. He's not a dragon, and I'm not really sure what his power level is. And also, once again, they're kind of going for these like non-consensual things, and I'm like, Aether, grow some brain cells. If the other being wants to work for you, they're going to be more useful than someone who's bound against their will. Like, whatever, maybe Aether really just doesn't have any brain cells. I don't know. And then it comes to C, which is basically just a human with an extended lifespan, basically just a thrall that does your will. That's a human. And like, yeah, I'm pretty sure Prince Aether has literally dozens of these, if not hundreds. Any surviving Conrians are literally immortal if they're pureblood. So any complicated role that Aether would need them to play, he would have lots of people around him with extended lifespans, and presumably people are loyal to him since he's the Prince of Conria, or at least he was the Prince of Conria, and if they at all want to get revenge on the gods for, destroying their entire civilization, like, yeah, I'm pretty sure Aether would find some willing volunteers to do that. So other than the divinity thing, which like we can workshop that, Aether should be able to win. Like, he should be able to defy fate. That's what I'm saying. Or at least as it's been presented now in the narrative, he should be able to get extremely close to defying fate or partially subvert it like Foka did. So all in all, trivializing and making defeating fate or subverting it so easy, the Hoyoverse writers inadvertently made Aether one of their main villains of the series appear like a buffoon, if not just straight up brain dead. So yeah, there's that. Why did Focalors torture Farina for no reason? Farina's mental agony comes from the fact that she believes she is living a total lie, deceiving everyone around her, yet she believes she can't confide in anyone, but that's not the truth. Not that she can't confide in anyone, but that she's living a total lie. Because Farina believes she's a phony, but Farina is the Hydro Archon, just the human half of her separated from her divine half. But her and Focalors are, or at least were at one point, the same being. So why didn't Focalors just tell Farina that? Since that's the truth. Like, Farina is half of the Hydro Archon. So when she's pretending to be the Hydro Archon, it's not a lie. It's not a complete lie anyway. So that would be easier for Farina to deal with. Because, like I said, it's the truth, or at least part of the truth. So, of course, still not being able to confide in anyone would still be straining on Farina's psyche, no matter what. But at least if she knew the truth, that she was in fact half of the Hydro Archon rightfully, the damage to her psyche would be significantly less. And, like, this is so strange to me because the fact that Focalors doesn't explain the truth to her, which again would insanely lessen Farina's mental anguish and imposter syndrome. Like, the fact that Focalors doesn't tell her that comes off as like abject cruelty on her part and an entire oversight by the authors. I mean, was the intent to make Focalors look insanely cruel to her human half for no reason? I sincerely doubt that. Focalors talks about Farina positively, so that means that this again is a frickin' writing error. Truly, the talent of this writing team truly boggles the mind. It is truly the world's finest authors just putting their heads together as Stephen King could never. Anyway, also, I want to address here, it's weird that Farina doesn't have her memories in the first place. At least she doesn't seem to. Like, if that was a thing, like, fine, that's pretty much what's established, but once again, why doesn't Focalors just tell Farina that she is the Hydro Archon, or at least half of her? Like, if you're split into two people, you're still both who the original person was, just different aspects of them, right? I'm losing brain cells just trying to dissect this. Why did Farina believe Mirmi in the first place? Focalors clearly didn't give Farina any proof or detailed explanation about the plan, hence why Farina was so confused all those years and why her burden was so difficult to bear on her psyche. So, if Farina truly had no knowledge of all the details, that she was the Hydro Archon split into halves, then why did Farina not just assume she was insane? Do they not have any mental health knowledge on Tevat? Because if Farina is just a normal human and all of her past memories were wiped, which appears to be the case that's presented in the game, If any normal human person had a version of themselves suddenly appear in a mirror before them and say that they should commit a dangerous crime for an extended period of time, defraud hundreds of thousands of people, commit a crime that could very well have Farina be punished by execution over, would that person not assume, not that they should do everything this image of themselves said to do without question and without asking any questions, but rather just assume that they were going insane? I think if that happened to the average person, they would probably be entirely freaked out, justifiably so, and then they would just try to ignore the whole thing and never mention it to anyone, surely not go through with the crime that the version of themselves in the mirror told them to do. Like, there are definitely people that would, but I overall don't understand how Farina could simultaneously know nothing about her true nature and the true nature of the plan, and yet also trust Focalore's intense demands of her and obey those demands without questions for hundreds of years. I mean, those two things just don't make sense together. Will Farina just do anything that someone mysterious tells her to do, no matter how dangerous, illegal, or nonsensical it is, without a shred of discretion? Because if so, oh my gosh, that is insane. And Farina either is insane or she's insanely dumb. And that's terrible, terrible writing. And speaking of water brain, Farina may have been tortured, but that doesn't excuse her actions either. Why didn't Farina make an emergency response plan in the 500 years she played pretend as the Hydro Archon in case Mirror Me was not able to divert the flood, which she was not? So I personally feel bad for Farina overall, and I think her portrayal in this story borders kind of on torture porn on how nonsensical her suffering is in terms of the plot and how gratuitously it is shown. It also hurts even more because Farina is shown to pretty much have no agency within her own tale, blindly and obediently doing anything Focalors tells her while not questioning anything or making her own decisions. So I pity her greatly, and I feel the writers did a grave disservice to her as a character. But that said, I'm not letting her off the hook completely. Why, in 500 years, did Farina not make an emergency response plan for if the flood did come to pass? I understand that she trusted Mirror Me to fix everything, but why does she take absolutely no action in case of a need for a backup plan? Especially because she, to our knowledge, receives absolutely no check-ins or updates from Focalors on how her attempts to stop the flood are going. Anyone in their right mind would make a plan B in case plan A failed, when the price of failure is hundreds of thousands of innocent people being drowned in a flood. An entire nation. Babies, children, the elderly, pregnant women, everyone. Yet Farina fails to do this or even make any attempts to make a plan B. Days or maybe weeks, the timeline is a little screwy. Honestly, the writers are kind of dodgy with it. But days or weeks before the flood comes to pass, the knave questions Farina as to why she does not have any evacuation plan for the people of Fontaine, any emergency response plan, and Farina has no answer. Farina doesn't actually prepare anything to help the people of Fontaine survive the flood if the flood does come to pass, and this might be more forgivable if the flood never came to pass, but it does come to pass. All of Fontaine is engulfed by the waters. And who do we see trying to save as many people as possible when this happens? Risley, who built his ark independently of the government, and the Spina di Rosilla, who also works independently of the government. We literally see no governmental response at all. They had nothing prepared at all, and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people died for their lack of preparation. Imposter or not, Farina was the acting Hydro Archon of the land, and is seen to have authority even over Nervalette, their High Justice, when she tells him to stop questioning her at the beginning of Chapter 5. Farina is responsible for the people of Fontaine, whether she was an imposter or not. They trusted her as their Archon, and she willingly chose to put herself in the position of their Archon. Therefore, she is responsible to the best of her abilities, fulfill that role and meet the responsibilities given to that role. And yet Farina had no ships built at all, no plans in place to do anything to save people if the flood did happen. With all the government's money, they could have built like 5 arcs, maybe more, to save everyone if the flood did come, which of course it does. You could say, like, oh, Farina didn't want to cause a panic by building giant arcs because that would let the citizens know the prophecy was real and that their own Archon was preparing for the worst, and that would cause them to panic. But that's not a valid excuse for her because Farina could have had the arcs built in secret, much like Risley does. She is shown to do other things in secret already, like investigating to see if the Institute has made any progress on stopping the prophecy. So there is no real reason to believe she couldn't have built the boats in secret. And also, I challenge the very idea of that rebuttal, because by the start of chapter 5, people are starting to panic already, and mostly because nothing is being done to prepare Fontaine if the worst comes to pass. And I can't emphasize this enough. The worst does come to pass. I think building the arcs in the open would actually have reassured the populace so that they knew their Archon was making plans to protect them even if the prophecy came true. I think Farina could both trust Mirami to stop the flood and at the same time make extensive plans for the survival of the people of Fontaine if her little Mirami failed. I don't think those ideas are mutually exclusive. For example, there could be a murderer roaming around my town and the police are hunting him down trying to catch him. I can both trust the police to do their jobs and lock my doors and windows at night. Locking my doors and windows doesn't suddenly make it so that I don't believe in the police's abilities to catch the murderer. It's just common sense. What Farina is doing right now in this metaphor is basically trusting in the police while leaving her windows and doors not just unlocked but entirely open and walking around her house in her nightgown, fretting she doesn't get killed. It's not sheer stupidity, it's negligence. And the people of Fontaine paid the price for her negligence and inaction. Their death toll is in the hundreds of thousands. More on this later. So Focalors is awful, but Farina is also depicted to be incompetent, negligent, reckless, and downright callous in her actions towards the people of Fontaine. She is supposed to be trying to keep safe, so that's hardly a good look for a character that the narrative tries to portray as a hero.
I, Farina, will use this trial to show the world the true meaning of justice! This time, I will protect you.
What the fuck are you saying?
What does this mean? This line is never explained or brought up again, and we never get any answers to it. Who is the you in this sentence that Farina says? Is it Nervalette, the people of Fontaine, Focalors? I just am baffled. As far as I can tell, like I said before, the line has absolutely no payoff whatsoever. Almost like it's been left in from an earlier draft where the Hydro Archon's relationship with the Hydro Dragon was a much more important part of her motivations. But whatever it is, this line has no payoff and no explanation and should have been removed because it doesn't go anywhere. I feel like the most obvious answer is that the you in Farina's statement is the people of Fontaine because Farina says this time, implying that in the past she failed to protect these people. So perhaps she's thinking about the people of Poisson that got dissolved. But then how will keeping up her illusion actually protect anyone? She has no plan to actually save the people of Fontaine. And she kept her lie up when the people of Poisson got dissolved. And she couldn't protect them then. So what the fuck is she talking about here? How will her retaining her illusion protect anyone? It's so strange. And what's also really strange is the fact that she uses the word you and not you all. And it makes it sound like she's not talking about the people of Fontaine because the way it's worded makes it sound like she's talking about a singular person, one individual. So like, this line is awful, makes no sense, and has no payoff. So if I'm missing something, please feel free to leave an explanation in the comments if there is an answer to this line that I'm just somehow overlooking. But as far as I can tell, this line just doesn't go anywhere and doesn't even make any sense. Why did the Hoyoverse writers decide to make lying seem good? You know, dear viewers, lying, the thing that's considered morally bad in every single religion on earth pretty much, and is generally considered by most people to be bad, and lying is bad. It's an immoral thing. I feel like this isn't really something that's up for debate, and yet the Hoyoverse writers, for some reason I'll never understand, decided to make Farina have a completely justifiable, nay, noble even, reason to lie to her friends and the people of Fontaine for hundreds of years, centuries upon centuries. Why did they do this? This is certainly not the quest's biggest issues, because at least it makes some logical sense. Farina was told by Mirami to lie, and because she has no brain cells of her own and she thought she was saving the world or whatever, she obeyed Mirami without question. But still, it's kind of an awkward thing depicting lying as being justified, basically, and noble even. I don't know. I'm not going to spend too much time on this point, as I don't think the writers were trying to make the message of the story be like, lying is based, kids. But I just think that they're hack and untalented, and like, so that's kind of one of the messages of the story. And I don't think they would try to do something like this on purpose. They do show the horrors of continuously lying on one's psyche by depicting Farina's pain in gratuitous detail. So I don't think this was intentional, but the writers basically did write a story where one of the main heroes of the story lies continuously for hundreds of years and in the end is rewarded for lying by having the Fontainians, at least some of them, a fraction of them really, we're going to get there, survive the flood. So like, why the writers decided to depict deceit as something even somewhat positive, I will never understand and I will never morally agree with. And I think they really should have analyzed that better and thought through the implications of what their own story was saying. And I feel like that was a mistake on their part. So we're going to move on from this one, but that is obviously an issue. Does Folklores not care that Neverlet is most likely going to go to war with the other Archons? Like, does she just not care? So, let's go ahead and listen to what Neverlet thinks of the other Archons real quick, okay? I'm going to play you a few clips.
Nothing will stop me from rendering judgment on each of the 7. As the Archon who won the authority of Geo, Deus Ori must be called to trial. If one does not wish to see us on opposite sides of a conflict, they need not worry, for I intend to stay in Fontaine for the foreseeable future, which could well mean another 400 years. As another point of consolation, even when the trial eventually takes place, it is still not a given that the judgment will lead to a physical confrontation. I shall fulfill my vow to judge all of the 7 in turn, even if the sky should fall and the ground give way. As the recipient of the authority of Animo, the god of breeze and hope must also stand trial. He spends most of his time being a harmless drunkard. Well, even so, I must meet him for myself and proceed from there. As a survivor of the dragon race who has regained my full dragonhood, I must fulfill my oaths and obligations, even if it means returning all the water in the oceans back to the heavens. In taking the authority of Electro, the Narukami placed herself on the list of the usurpers. She will... Oh, you say she has isolated herself in the plane of Euthymia, and now rarely appears in public. Then I shall pay her a visit in another few centuries. Though the day will come when I put her on trial, I must commend the god of verdure on her sense of responsibility. Few things are without flaws in this world, but the devotion and benevolence she displays are a testament to her commitment to continued progress. I felt enormous regret when I learned of the mistreatment she has endured over the past 500 years.
In these voice lines that I just played, Neverlet says that he's going to judge the Archons, even if that judgment comes in a few centuries. And like, just because it's going to be in a few centuries, which really seems like the writer's cop-out way of saying, basically, don't think about this too much, doesn't mean it doesn't matter. In the line about Zhongli, he says it may not come to a physical conflict, but like, he doesn't seem opposed to that either. I mean, Neverlet sounds pissed. Is him facing off with the Archons in the future not going to have civilian casualties? Sure, Neverlet now values the people of Fontaine after spending hundreds of years with them, but what about the rest of humanity? Does he value them enough to spare them from the fighting? Especially because the people of Fontaine were originally Oceanade mimics, which Neverlet somehow gave full humanity to. So since he sims for water and all things water, it makes kind of sense to me that his impression of the people of Fontaine is going to be warmer than his feelings towards the humans of other nations. Also, even if Neverlet does avoid humans getting caught in the crossfire, which sounds a tad unlikely unless he holds back some, who's to say the Archons deserve him arriving on their doorstep to war? A certainly does without even knowing what crimes she may or may not have committed against dragonkind because of her long laundry list of war crimes and personal crimes. But what about Zhongli, Venti, and baby Nahida? They're shown to be benevolent, kind, strong, and giving Archons to their people. To me as an audience member, I certainly don't think they deserve that thing showing up on their doorstep, especially Nahida, who is literally the epitome of purity and kindness to an almost inhuman degree. While Neverlet does speak more kindly of little Nahida than the others, he literally says all the Archons will be judged and the day will come when he puts her on trial, including Nahida. Like she is who he's putting on trial in that line. So she's not going to be pardoned either, apparently. If any of them have committed atrocities or crimes against the dragons or Neverlet himself, worthy of having a vengeful, fully empowered Neverlet to send down upon them, we've never been informed of such crimes. So it makes Folklore seem extremely selfish in empowering Neverlet to his full powers again without a commitment of peace from Neverlet himself towards the other archons and nations. In fact, he assures the opposite. Sure, Folklore's people of Fontaine are safe from the vengeful dragon, but what about everyone else's people and they themselves? Like, if Folklore's doesn't care about other humans, only her own, and doesn't care about the other archons, maybe even hates them or something, that's never explored or made clear, so it just makes her seem thoughtless and reckless rather than interesting and intelligent. And speaking of the dragon, Nervalite got his power back, and I feel nothing. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think giving Nervalite his full power back is a terrible narrative decision. It's even pretty subtly hinted at, subtle by Genshin standards, earlier on in the narrative when Nervalite says, almost offhandedly, that if he were to be restored to his full power, then he would be able to stop the flood. He is not, for some reason, we will get there. But it's mentioned so quickly and offhandedly, and Nervalite pretty much completely and immediately dismisses the idea, that when it comes true, it is actually rather shocking to the audience because it was just treated as such a non-option before, but now it is one. So, like, okay, I guess. So, like, that's almost good, though it feels wrong in my bones to call any part of this writing good. But I do feel that not that regaining his original power doesn't make sense, but rather I feel it was a wasted opportunity. So this is one of the issues. I at least don't have to spend 10 minutes trying to explain why the basic narrative beats don't make sense, but it's one of those problems instead where the story could have been incredible and amazing and show-stopping, but instead it's just an event in the story that just kind of happens. I think if they were literally going to have the climax of the entire 5-chapter story be Nervalite regaining his original power and saving everyone, the writer should have built that up more and built up to it more. Maybe have Nervalite talk about what it was like before his power was stolen, if he was even alive then. It's a little confusing how he wasn't the original Hydra Dragon. I'm not really, sure. We don't really get much information on that. Like, he says he's not the original, but, what does that mean? Anyway. But, they could have Nervalite maybe talk about how it's painful for him to be separated from his power, or how it's painful that he feels so weak that he can't do anything for the people of Fontaine when he loves them and he wants to save them. Basically, I just think this moment where Nervalite gets his original power back could have been extremely emotional and impactful and built up to very well and just marvelous. But in the actual quest, I felt nothing. It's just something that happens. And I felt that way because the authors never gave me a reason to care if Nervalite got his powers back. He seemed to be getting along fine without them. It could have been this impactful, beautiful moment if built up to properly, but because we don't get any insight into what having his powers returned to him means to Nervalite, it's just kind of like, okay, that happened, I guess, which is a shame because it could have been a really cool moment. And Folklore doesn't give him the power back because she believes it's rightfully his or because she has personal feelings for him. Even she doesn't have any emotions wrapped up in returning his power to him. It's just a very practical decision because the terrible narrative was written this way. But Folklore basically needs to give him the power to save everyone, so it's an almost utilitarian choice. So I just don't feel any emotion during the scene where Nervalite gets his powers returned to him, even though it's the big climax of the whole story. And of course, the whole story is an absolute clusterfuck, specifically the last chapter, but that's kind of irrelevant here. And I feel like that's such a shame because I would have really liked to feel something. I feel like the idea of Nervalite getting his original power back could have been great. Like I said, very exciting and impactful and had very good emotional catharsis to it. But because we don't really find out what that would mean to Nervalite or what it was like for him to be separated from his power, or maybe he never had the power, but his father dragon or something, how do bishops even work, told him what it was like to have their power, and Nervalite always wanted that feeling. Just anything, just anything to make it more grounded and personal in the character's emotions. And it could have been great, but instead I just feel nothing, and I think that's a shame. So this note isn't a complete plot hole or anything, or that the story is actually incomprehensible. It's just, this is a waste of an opportunity, and what could have been a moment of beauty just became a random event that happened in the story because it had to for the plot, and I think that's truly disappointing. I shouldn't have to do homework, part 2. By the way, speaking of Nervalite regaining his full power as a dragon, the Dragon War should have been explained within the main storyline. Obviously, I think, people forget, the Hoyoverse writers forget that, most people do not read the lore or, know about that kind of deep lore of Teyvat. The only reason my brother even knows about it because I explained it to him, and the only reason I know it is because I watched a YouTuber explain it to me. I'm pretty sure it's only mentioned before this quest in very obscure books and stuff about, the origin of Teyvat, but, the average player is going to have no idea, what Nervalite is even talking about. They may not know dragons were ever, the dominant species on Teyvat. Like, they obviously know the dragons exist because of Dvalin and Astaha, but, like, Dvalin nor Astaha just go on rants about how, like, dragons used to, like, rule over the land and how these usurpers came in and took their land and stuff. So, like, that really should have been explained in the main story because, once again, it's not fair to expect people to do homework. And that's pretty much it. And I don't know where to put this in, but the explanation for Fontainian people having babies make no sense. So we're kind of like putting Nervalet to one side for a second, although he is the one that gives us this information. I know this is a little random. We're going to get back to Nervalet in a second, but I didn't really know where else to put this in, so I'm inserting it here. So at the end of this quest, Nervalet explains that, like, basically before the Fontainian people were turned into real people, they were just water mimics. And when Paimon's like, how did they have babies? He's like, oh, they prayed at the fountain and then knew water mimic babies would come to them. But, like, this is bullshit. Did no one from Fontaine ever have a baby with someone from another nation? Because if they did, presumably that just wouldn't work. But you're saying that nobody in Teyvat has ever tried to get married to a Fontaine person that was from a different land? And also, like, do Fontainian women not go into labor? And if they do, what happens then? Like, if they don't, why has no one ever questioned that? And, like, why do other people of other nations not question this? And if the women of Fontaine do go into labor, how does that work? Do the babies just materialize out of thin air but no one questions it? Like, the point is, it's just a very BS explanation, and Nervalet's basically like, don't think about it. But, like, I am. And you should not be afraid of the audience thinking through the implications that you are putting out. And I don't think that was a necessary line anyway. They could have just had it like, the mimics are so good, they operate it like people in every single way except that their blood is seawater blood. But no, they decided to give an explanation for it, and it just raises more questions. So sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent getting off the topic of Nervalet, but I was like, this is definitely a plot hole, and it's stupid. So just adding that in there. Why is Nervalet human anime man? I wanted to bring it up here that it is brought up multiple times. The question of why Nervalet was born into a humanoid form instead of a dragon form, it even comes up in his character demo. And again, if this was a normal, well-constructed story, we would have got a payoff or explanation for this at some point. But obviously, we have never gotten one. It's literally never addressed again. Why was it brought up multiple times if Hoyoverse did not want to explain it? Teyvat is a world where many fantastical, crazy things can happen. A dragon taking on a humanoid form, honestly, is not that crazy or fantastical an idea. It has been done in many other series over the years. Heck, Zhongli actually did it every day. He wasn't a biological dragon, but when he took on the form of a dragon while he actively ruled over Liyue, and then he also can take on a human form, and that was never brought up as a serious question or plot point. So I don't think I really would have questioned why Nervalet had a human form if Nervalet himself had not specifically brought it to the audience's attention on multiple separate occasions. If Hoyoverse did not have an explanation for why Nervalet had a human form, or it wasn't plot relevant, it should have been brought up at all, but it was, and then there was no payoff for it. That's bad writing. It's like the opposite of Chekov's gun. In the Fontaine Archon quest, the Hoyoverse writers almost decided to do the exact opposite of Chekov's gun and just throw in a million different facts of information that were never going to be elaborated on or explained or come to anything. It's like metaphorically just throwing guns on every single piece of furniture in the room and then never using any of them. And that's obviously disappointing, though perhaps not surprising at this point. Once again, if Nervalet being a dragon, but having a humanoid form was not going to be important to the story or story relevant and never should have brought up in the first place, but it was, so once again, it's just a plot point that we never get any answers to. Hooray. Is Nervalet omnipotent? He appears to just like declare the primordial seawater in the Fontainian people's veins is blood, and thus it is so. And when asked how by Paimon, Nervalet explains that he has full control over the element of hydro, but like, that doesn't check out. Blood is not water or hydro, which I thought were different things on Teyvat anyway, but the writers forgot their own rules, I guess. Or more specifically, blood is not just water. Blood is made of two main things: plasma, which is water, along with nutrients such as glucose, ions, proteins, waste products, and hormones, and also red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So assuming humans on Teyvat have a blood makeup similar or the same as humans do on Earth, which we have no reason to believe that they do not share the same blood makeup because they function in pretty much the same way as humans on Earth in every other way that we've seen. And if not, we've never been told so. So given all that, let me pose you the question, does Nervalet have control over glucose or ions or proteins, red blood cells, white platelets? Does he have control of hormones? No, I don't think so. So it makes not a lick of sense that he can just will into existence fully functional blood into the Fontainian people's veins. That literally makes no sense with the given explanation in game, so therefore it's a plot hole and a huge one. It's not a tiny little detail that doesn't matter. It's how the Fontainian people survive the flood and don't get dissolved, which defies the prophecy. Which is the whole point of the plot of this 5 chapters, tens of hours of my life I can't get back. So yeah, it's a big fucking deal that the given explanation of how they save everyone doesn't make a single shred of sense. A dragon of water cannot suddenly will primordial seawater to be human blood. That actually makes no sense. That would be like if Nervalet turned a pond of water into a pond of melted chocolate. Like, are melted chocolate and water both liquids? Yes. Are they both water? No. So yes, it's a big, big problem that the explanation for how the Fontainians are able to survive the flood makes not a lick of sense. Speaking of which, can Nervalet resurrect the dissolved people? Since Nervalet can do insane bullshit, why can't he just resurrect the people who are Oceanades into people again? We know that the people that dissolve are not truly dead. Their consciousness is still in the water, and they are still able to even make choices as an Oceanade, and they remember who they are. This is shown several times in the story. One of the first that comes to mind and most obvious is how Silver and her other male companion, whose name I don't remember, are able to save Navia, or at least grant her a few more seconds of life before she dissolved, so that she can be saved by Nervalet, protecting her even in death, which matches what Silver and the other guy would do in life, and even is against the will of the other Oceanades, who also remember their memories from their original life, and so everyone appears to have their original memories and know who they are. The Oceanades in that scene know who Navi is, they know that they lived with the Spina Della Rosa, they pretty much know everything. And the fact that the Oceanades have all, their consciousness is still intact from when they were people is evidenced again by the girls that were the victims of the serial disappearances case. They want revenge on their killer. And the girls remember who their killer was, they remember what he did to them, and they have a desire to exact revenge on him. In the same quest, his original lover also retains her original memories, and she tries to warn him or tell him not to look for her anymore as her last act of mercy towards him, once again just showing her that her memories from her life as a human are still very much intact, and her personality is the same as it was then, or at least very similar. So, the people who got dissolved even many years ago, their minds and consciousness are still fully functional. They haven't been distorted by the water pretty much at all from what we can see. So if Nervalet has full control over water, and he's able to turn primordial seawater into blood with no effort at all, just willing it into existence, why can't he just make the people that were turned into Oceanades back into humans? The Hydra Archon wasn't even a native of Teyvat, and she used the primordial sea to turn Oceanades into people, or at least people like mimics that were like people, a super long time ago. So Nervalet, he's way super cracked. He's this OP dragon who can just appear to do random ass super powerful bullshit. So why can't he just resurrect everyone? I'm just saying that the writers should address this because they're the ones that decided to make Nervalet's full powers OP and not make any sense. If he's able to just make water into blood just by thinking it, I think he should be able to resurrect the Oceanades too. And if not, we should have a thorough, understandable, and easy to follow reason as to why that's not possible for him to do. One more thing before we get off the topic of Nervalet's extremely OP and nonsensical powers. Why wasn't Nervalet able to stop the flood? Nervalet says he has full control over Hydro, and him stopping the flood actually makes more sense than him turning the primordial seawater into blood, because the flood is made of water, and blood is not water. Not solely water, anyway. But, this is never really brought up as a possible thing. He doesn't even have a line I tried to stop the flood, but I couldn't. So I'm assuming, he didn't even try. The flood happens after he gets his full power back, so, I'm assuming he had the opportunity to try to stop the flood, but like he just either didn't try or he did and failed. But if the second option is true, that's never conveyed to the audience because like the writers don't appear to care about their own audience. So yeah, basically I'm saying Nervalet's powers are stupid and OP and they're just like nonsensical. And if he could stop the flood and chose not to, then yikes, because the Fontainians did not all survive the flood, obviously. When the flood happens and the animators and the writers show this montage of our few named characters helping save people, there's this joyous music and everyone's smiling and things are happy. But no, hundreds of thousands of people, or thousands depending on the population of Fontaine, maybe millions if the population goes in the opposite direction, are drowning as we speak. As we watch that cutscene, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people are drowning. Nervalet, through bullshit dragon magic that makes no sense, made it so the people of Fontaine didn't dissolve in the water. But he didn't make it so that they didn't die of a normal flood. Like, they don't dissolve in the water, but that doesn't mean that everyone in Fontaine, or even the majority of people, survived the flood. One, because the government, Farina and Nervalet's, by the way, had no official emergency response plan that we're aware of. It's a thing that the Knave points out to us in the very story. Basically, people were unprepared, and the flood is shown to happen very, very, very suddenly. So most likely it caught most people, a majority of people, it caught them by surprise. Human beings on Earth in real life don't dissolve instantly upon being touched by water, but plenty die in sudden flash flooding or even floods that they have been forewarned of. People can get caught in their homes, under fallen debris. They can be sleeping when the flood happens and not wake up until it's too late to escape, be unable to swim, be too old or too young to swim, be handicapped or otherwise disabled. Rushing water is so powerful that it can sweep people off their feet with as little as 6 inches of running water. And people can be knocked against debris, rocks, anything else hard in the water and be knocked unconscious instantly, leading to their death by drowning. Even if the poor citizens of Fontaine make it to the surface, and that's a big if, we only see a handful of rescue boats out there helping people. Notably, again, all those rescue boats are from the Spina de Rue, Scylla, and Risley's giant ark from the Fortress of Meripede. So once again, thanks, Farina. Nervalet too, by the way. But like we only see them, we only literally see, I think, like 5 or 6, maybe 7 boats, 10, 12 at max. And Fontaine is a huge nation. So most likely most people will, even if they make it to the surface, will tire out and drown before a rescue boat can even get to them. Especially, again, children, the elderly, anyone who has a physical or mental handicap. This is not even talking about infants. How are a mother and father supposed to protect their infants? This is so dark. But the undeniable truth that the game presents but does not address is that thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people died in the flood. That is just a fact. To have any hopes of having no casualties, they would have had to have everyone, every single citizen of Fontaine in the ark before the flood began, as Noah and his family were in the Old Testament of the Bible. Otherwise, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news / common sense, but a vast, vast majority of Fontainians are now dead, drowned in a watery grave. Earlier, I had a whole section where I discussed, you remember, it wasn't that long ago, how stupidly easy it was for Vocalors and her friends to defy fate and the will of Celestia. But when you think about it, Celestia wanted most of the Fontainians, if not all of them, to die, and man, did they get their wish. Even if this is never addressed in game, even if the game tries to pretend otherwise, most of the Fontaine people are dead, following the logic presented in the game. So I guess Vocalors and her friends couldn't outsmart fate after all. Fontaine's infrastructure is utterly wrecked. Also, it's utterly insane and stupid beyond all comprehension how when the waters recede after the flood in the game, everything is exactly as it was before? Have the writers never seen a flood or read a newspaper or something? Flash flooding is insanely destructive and powerful. It can uproot trees, destroy buildings, destroy bridges. It can even create deep channels in the earth. All of Fontaine, but especially their court, their largest city, would have sustained significant damage to its infrastructure. People's houses would be outright destroyed, or at the very least significantly damaged. And yet when the waters recede in the game, everything is exactly how they left it. We don't even get some BS lines like, so much of the city is damaged, but we will rebuild. Sure, we see a newspaper heading about Navia helping to rebuild Poisson or whatever, but the wide-scale, absolute devastation done upon the country's infrastructure goes completely unaddressed, and it definitely happened. Who knows, maybe Nervalet just made the Flood do absolutely no damage to anything with his BS unexplained powers. It's beyond unrealistic how happy the ending is depicted. Following any logic, a vast majority of the Fontainians, especially the most vulnerable, are dead and drowned, and the city and towns of Fontaine are in ruins. Basically, everyone's dead and everything's destroyed. Do I need to go on? The mistake that is the whale. The whale. Where do I even begin? The fact that an alien whale is now something that I have to talk about in terms of my Genshin makes me extremely sad. The depths of my agony, not even this whale's sweet, sweet songs could cure me of. No, I feel like I shouldn't have to explain why the alien whale is dumb, but like since we're already here and like you're already watching this, I suppose I should enlighten you. Point number 1. Genshin is a fantasy game. Random alien whales were never part of the bargain, nor should they be part of the bargain. Now, I know people would challenge this by saying that the Traveler themselves, it is a descender from beyond the stars, but it's just that they're a descender. Whenever Genshin talks about things like that, they always use very specific terminology, like for example, descender from beyond the stars. There was never any talk of aliens or spaceships or even distant galaxies. Anything sci-fi within Genshin is fantasy coded for good reason, and that's because previously I mentioned Genshin Impact is a fantasy adventure action anime game. Hoyoverse has a sci-fi game. It's known as Honkai Star Rail and its accompanying friends. We don't need Genshin to become Honkai Star Rail. We don't want that. People who want to play Star Rail are already playing it and they're enjoying it. They're loving it. They don't need Genshin to become Star Rail, and people who play Genshin certainly don't want Genshin to become like Star Rail. I feel like this isn't a difficult concept to understand. I feel like it shouldn't even need to be said, but here we are. If you're in a certain genre, to put something that is very clearly of another genre into the story very suddenly and without any kind of natural buildup is a very immersion-breaking thing. It feels like very much not a part of the world that you've set up. A great example of this would be if in the middle of Lord of the Rings, a flying saucer with little green men just like flew down into the middle of the battlefield with the orcs and the heroes and just started like doing alien shit. If this happened, it would break the audience's immersion and be extremely off-putting and make no sense. And the aliens themselves, the little green Martians, they just do not fit within the world of Lord of the Rings. Now, while Genshin is not as strictly fantasy as Lord of the Rings, I would more so say that Genshin is more fantasy than sci-fi. We have had tiny little implications of things, again, from beyond the stars, like our Traveler being from beyond the stars, and we have always had advanced robotic technology from Conria and other now-deceased civilizations. But other than Fontaine, for the most part, people in Teyvat, have very limited technology. They ride around on horses, not in cars. They rely on magic rather than technology. They don't have a lot of modern technology, certainly not futuristic tech. And they do have futuristic robotics. It's always of these ancient civilizations that are destroyed and no longer operating. The only exception being Fontaine. And advanced robotics have the Ruin Guards, they've always been around since the beginning of the game, so they feel naturally part of Teyvat because they've always been there. The alien whale, I can't believe I have to say those words, has never been mentioned before. It's literally explicitly not of this world, and very clearly so because it doesn't fit or match anything we've ever seen before, and it's not even close to anything we've seen or fought before. So the dumb whale breaks my immersion, and it feels like it doesn't belong in this story, and it's also inherently silly because aliens would most likely not look like sparkly whales, like an exact copy of a whale from Earth, but sparkly and in space. That's just inherently dumb. They did space whales in the Ahsoka TV show too, and it was stupid there too, and it's just not a good idea. So to start off, the whole alien whale sucks, and it just doesn't fit the world of Teyvat. Also, the whale is not foreshadowed. Well, anyway. Moving forward from that, the whale is stupid. It's also barely foreshadowed at all, and with something this insane and unlike anything we've ever seen before, all of the foreshadowing it could have gotten would have been insanely beneficial to it, but instead we only get one piece of foreshadowing within this quest, and that's when Childe sees the whale in his dream, and then we're able to see his dream because we're possessing his vision, ? I don't know. That's not explained well either. So We see the whale a total of 1 time, and, like, that's a dream. So, like, it's not even clear if the whale within that dream is a physical entity. It could have been, like, since we're seeing Childe's dream, it could have been part of his imagination. Now, like, it wasn't implied to be part of his imagination, but you could say you can't prove that it wasn't part of his imagination and it wasn't a figment of his dream because it was a dream. Also, I also believe in fairness. The first conversation we have with Childe in Fontaine, actually, correction, the only conversation we have with Childe in the entire quest line, I'm pretty sure, which is another questionable decision we'll talk about later. I think Childe might mention that he has a dream about the whale or something like that. I can't remember. I think so. And I'm not rewatching it because fuck this whole quest. But anyway, those are the only 2 times the whale is mentioned or we see the whale. And that's like 2 times in a whole 5-chapter quest. I mean, tens and tens of hours. I don't know how long it is from start to finish, but it's freaking long. But neither of those 2 times prepare you at all for when the whale just smashes through the floor of the opera house entirely unannounced and pretty much entirely unforeshadowed. If the writers were going to unwisely introduce an element as insane as an alien whale into the world of Tevat, it should have been what the entire quest was about. Every single scene should have been preparing and priming the audience's mind for the fact that an alien whale is something believable within the Genshin universe and that we are going to have to fight it. But instead, the writers spend almost no time on the alien whale. It appears extremely abruptly. It's not explained how it works. Like, it's kind of flying. What? And it exists in a different dimensional space? What? Oh, and it also wants to eat the people of Fontaine. What? And it literally just appears, and therefore it's like, oh my goodness, it's a whale, and it's here to eat people. Like, Nervalet literally has to scream exposition at us because so little about this thing has been actually set up in the story. It's jarring. It's off-putting. And like I said, if the writers, which in my opinion is a very unwise choice, but if they chose to introduce an element so foreign to the viewer as an alien whale from beyond the stars, which again is an inherently stupid concept, it's goofy, it's something that I expect to see in Honkai Star Rail, and like, then but if they were going to go with that dumb idea, then we should have had as much information about the whale as possible. We should have talked about the whale over and over and over and over again. We should have had it thoroughly explained to us how the whale works, what it's doing here, how do we defeat it, where it comes from. I mean, everything. We should have known this whale inside and out because that would prepare us to suspend our disbelief, even get to attempt to try to get us to suspend our disbelief so that the audience can buy that an alien whale is something that could exist within the world of Tevat. When you're introducing an element as foreign and as downright insane as an alien whale, you don't get away with a little like pity pass, like, oh, you mentioned it in one line of dialogue and we saw it briefly from a distance in a dream. Like, no, you need to actually try to set it up properly and like take time to naturally incorporate it into the world, to establish rules that it obeys, to establish what needs to be done to defeat the whale, and so on and so forth. I personally think the whale is inherently dumb, and I never would have introduced such a goofy-ass element into what is supposed to be a serious story if I were the writers, but if the writers were going to, then they should have done it properly, and there's no excuses, matey. None. They just didn't even try. Where's Childe? This will be a rather short section, as my main man Childe did nothing wrong, and is fantastic and wonderful, but I do have a complaint. We spend over half this quest looking for this man. It is literally the inciting incident of the entire 3rd and 4th chapter. He goes missing in the fortress, so we're tasked with finding him and finding out what happened to him. He also gives us his vision in chapter 1, and we hold on to the vision in our inventory through every single chapter after this. And like, if the writers were normal, if they had remembered to take their normal pills, this would usually mean that we're going to have a scene at the end of the story, something called a payoff, where we return the vision to Childe. Childe was such a big motivator for the traveler throughout big portions of this quest, and there was this continuing ongoing mystery of where is Childe, what's happened to Childe, and it's literally left as a cliffhanger for one of the chapters. And yet, at the end of the quest, we don't even get to speak to this man. Childe shows up fighting the whale, but he never has a speaking line. My brother's friend joked, like, maybe they couldn't afford the voice actor, but like, Genshin has money, they can afford my boy Griffin Burns. I'm sure he's on contract anyway. And then, like, Shirk, who we're going to talk about in a second. I like to call her Skank. But anyway, we'll talk about Skank later. She's a crime against humanity in her own way. But anyway, so Skank just chucks my boy Childe into a portal. And I don't understand why she did that. Like, her chucking the whale in the portal is already dumb enough, and we will get to her. Oh my gosh, we will get to her. But why did she chuck Childe too? Like, couldn't she have just told him to stop? And he would have stopped fighting? Or, like, once she threw the whale into the portal, she could have closed it, and after fighting, like, the whale is gone, so Childe would have stopped fighting. Why would he keep fighting an enemy that isn't there? And then we could have had a conversation with him and been like, you okay? I'm glad I found you. Here's your vision back. I love you, boo. But, like, no, we never get a chance to speak to him. Shirk just chucks him into the portal, and we never get to speak to him or see Childe again after that point. At the end of the quest, we have a throwaway line from the knave explaining, like, oh, Childe's back in Chesnaya recovering from his injuries, and, like, just give the vision to me, I'll return it to him. But that doesn't feel satisfying at all. I wanted to return the vision to him. I was the one who was entrusted with the vision for the entire quest. Why did the traveler just give it to the knave, who doesn't even like Childe? The knave literally repeats multiple times that she doesn't really care about Childe, and she doesn't care where he is, and she just sees him as kind of an annoyance. So, like, I, as the player, have no guarantee that the knave isn't just gonna, like, chuck his vision over the side of a cliff or give it to some random member of the Fatui. So, like, we literally betrayed Childe's trust because he trusted us specifically to hold onto the vision, and then at the end of the quest, instead of faithfully returning that vision to him or holding onto it until we could see him again, or at least give it to someone he trusts, like a member of his family, we just give it to the knave, who, again, has literally said on multiple occasions that she doesn't like Childe and she doesn't care about him. But beyond that, the point is, it's just unsatisfying. Like, Childe is a motivating part of this quest for so long. I, as the player, would have at least liked to have a short conversation with him, making sure he's all right and returning the vision to him. And just, like, I don't know, actually talking to this character who we've been searching for like half this quest, it's just a baffling writing decision. Like, can you imagine if this was in any other story where you spend, like, multiple chapters looking for a character who is your friend, or at least kind of your friend, and then at the end of the story, you kind of see them from a distance, but you never get to speak to them, and then at the end of the story, some other character that you care less about is like, oh yeah, that guy you were looking for the whole time, he's fine, and I'll return this object that you've been holding on to him for him. I'll take that. Don't worry about it. You can trust me. Like, what? No. That's unsatisfying. I feel like I don't have to explain why it's unsatisfying. It's baffling, it's unsatisfying, and I hate it. And I'm sorry, Childe fangirls, you deserve so much better. And also, cover your ears, Childe fangirls. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but Childe should probably be dead. The writers at Hoyoverse established back in the Leeway Archon quest that Childe can't be in Foul Legacy for very long because it does serious damage to his body. This is very well established, and it comes up in his story quest. Basically, Childe, in his story quest, so he used Foul Legacy either a few days ago or a few weeks ago, timeline unclear, and he uses it in his battle with the Traveler. So, when his story quest takes place, he's already had some time to recover from the damage that it does to his body. And if we assume that the battle with the Traveler, back in the Leeway Archon quest, he was in Foul Legacy for several minutes. Let's say 3. Most battles actually aren't that long. So Childe was in Foul Legacy for 3 minutes. A few days or a few weeks later, we meet up with him for his story quest. And we're hanging out with him, and then at the end, he uses his Foul Legacy mode again for only about maximum, I would say, 60 seconds. And this absolutely obliterates my man. Childe is literally laying on the ground, hiding from his little brother. I mean, he can barely move. He's clearly in pain. His voice is strained when he speaks. So, like, my man was completely devastated from using his Foul Legacy form 3 minutes, either days or weeks ago, unclear, and then using it for 60 seconds on the day of the story quest. That's how strenuous Foul Legacy is on his body. So what exactly do you think being in Foul Legacy fighting the whale for an unknown period of time is going to do to him? Yeah, it's going to kill him, obviously, or injure him so badly he's going to be disabled for the rest of his life. Like, is that the reason we're not allowed to see Childe at the end? Because it would be traumatizing to see how absolutely devastated his body is? Well, I would rather see that, because then maybe I could try to help him. And also, there's still the fact that Childe should be dead. Well, I would still rather see that, because then maybe I could try to help him. And also, Him being extremely injured, that's still the conclusion that the audience reaches if they know the rules of his foul legacy form, which has been clearly established within the narrative. So it just feels worse that Childe's off screen and we never get to see him or check on him because, like, no, I don't want Childe to be injured. I love him. I think he's great. I think he's one of the only characters in this quest that doesn't do anything that just makes no sense and is complete bullshit. So I don't want Childe to be injured at all. But the writers set up the rules that if he uses foul legacy for too long, or even for a pretty short amount of time, it does serious damage to his body. And when we see the whale burst out of the floor in the opera house, I hate that sentence, Childe, it is implied that Childe has been fighting that stupid whale for some time. Like, we can see he's in his foul legacy, and he looks like he's been in foul legacy so long that there's damage to the foul legacy armor, which we've never seen before. So we have no idea how long he's been fighting the whale, but I do think it's implied that he's been fighting it for at least some significant period of time. I mean, when the Traveler then goes into the freaking pocket dimension or whatever the hell happens, Childe is still fighting when we arrive. So, like, he's been fighting for, like, I mean, we have no idea. I would honestly say he looks like he's been fighting the whale for days, or at least hours. I mean, we don't really know the amount of time, but the point is, my man Childe should be dead. Like, realistically, he should be super, super dead. Now, if the writers had put in some kind of explanation for why Childe's not dead and not insanely injured, I think that would be good. Say, for example, he says he's been training with foul legacy and now he can sustain it for multiple days at a time when we first meet him in the quest. Now, that would be kind of a random thing for him to just say, but, like, who knows, maybe he's bragging to us, or, like, he wants to spar with us or something like that because he's battle crazy or whatever. Like, if he had said something like that, it would still be kind of bullshit, honestly, because the idea that he could improve that much in such a short amount of time is obviously far-fetched and quite ridiculous. And there's also the idea that abyssal magic itself is poisonous to human bodies, but whatever. It would have at least been a ham-fisted explanation, but, like, at least it would have been better than no explanation, because we literally didn't get any. They could have at least tried to make it make sense, but, like, there's nothing like that. So, we as the audience have no reason to assume that Childe can handle foul legacy for any longer period of time than he could in the past. And even if he can handle being in foul legacy mode for slightly longer, because he's been training or whatever, he was still fighting the whale for, like, a super long extended period of time. Like I said, we're not told exactly how long, but it's gonna take a genius to, like, imply that, like, he should be dead or at least severely injured from his ongoing battle with the whale. Freaking hate that whale. So basically, because I actually have a brain that works, I actually thought this was going to be a plot point at the end of the quest, because once again, I thought we would get to have a conversation with Childe and see him, because once again, I have brain cells. I thought Childe being severely injured by foul legacy was going to be one of the final plot points of the chapter. See, if I was writing the story, or if any writer with a brain was writing the story, we would get to see the man we've been looking for over half the quest at the end. And I personally thought he was going to be, like, insanely injured, probably on the brink of death, and then the Traveler was going to, like, cry, or at least be somewhat concerned. Let's be real, more of the second option. The Traveler doesn't really seem to care about him that much, to be honest, which is kind of sad, because nobody really seems to care about him, to be honest, except, like, his family back at home, but they're not here. And then, like, Nervalette or Farina or somebody with a lot of, like, hydropower, because hydro is, like, associated with healing, at least in gameplay, was gonna, like, heal him for his contributions to Fontaine, because, like, he held the whale off for so long and, like, saved so many people. It also would have been kind of nice, like, arc for Childe's character, would have been a nice arc for him, or, like, redemption for him, because, like, in Leeway, he almost drowns an entire city. But then in Fontaine, he fights the whale in foul legacy and destroys his body and risks his own life to save people from a flood. So, like, it kind of comes full circle. And, like, he would have absolutely become more heroic and redeemed himself. And then Farina and Nervalette were going to, like, heal him for that because he's made heroic choices. So, like, they'd be like, you serve Fontaine. And then he's going to be healed. And then we were going to, like, hug him and, like, or I don't know, like, cordially high-five him. And then everything was going to be good. And then we were going to give him back the vision. And then he was going to go on off to Chesnaya, where we would probably see him somewhere in the Chesnaya and Archon quest. But no, none of that shit happens. The writers just forget their own rules about foul legacy, and they forget that foul legacy is devastating to Childe's body. Yes, the knave says he's resting and recovering from his injuries, but that just comes off as such bullshit, because, like, Childe should be dead. Or at least his injuries should be so severe he's, like, severely disabled now. Like, maybe the knave is hiding it from us, But, like, the Knave has no reason to hide that from us because she doesn't care about Childe. So she wouldn't be concerned with saving face for him or anything like that. So I feel like the Knave just tells us the truth. So it feels like the authors literally forgot about how foul legacy works and how much damage it does to Childe's body. They don't even address that the injuries that he's resting and recovering from are from being in foul legacy mode. Like, for all we know, they could just be injuries that the whale gave him during their fight. But, like, whatever. It's fine. The writers just forgot their own rules. Like, it's all cool. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And I love Childe. I don't want him to be hurt or dead or badly injured. But, like, by the writers' own rules that they themselves established, Childe should definitely be dead, or at least near death. And that's like another reason I would have liked to see him and confirm he's okay with my own eyes and return the vision that he entrusted to me back to him, not give it to the fucking Knave. Everything about this quest is baffling, like, even to the smallest details. Like, literally, just Childe, who has a pretty small part overall in the quest, they just utterly failed with him. They utterly failed to make it satisfying. They made it awful, and, like, they forgot how his powers worked. Like, my boy, I'm sorry, you deserve better, Childe. The writers forgot how your powers work. Lo siento, niño. Traveler kind of is a bad friend. This section I'm gonna keep kind of brief because I don't think it's an invalid writing choice to make the Traveler not be warm towards Childe. It's just not a choice I personally like very much. We've only spent some time with Childe, and the Traveler doesn't appear to like Childe very much, which is kind of sad and a little embarrassing for him because, like, he seems to like the Traveler quite a lot, but basically, like, the Traveler doesn't really appear to like him back very much. And it's not the direction I would have taken the Traveler, because the Traveler is very kind and forgiving in general. I mean, we literally helped Mushi even though he tried to, like, be a god and stuff and kill us and kill Nahida. But, like, we're very compassionate towards him. But, like, Childe, we're kind of cold towards him. By the way, obviously, you figured it out by now, but when I say we, Traveler is mostly a self-insert character, so that's why I'm using, like, strange pronouns occasionally. But anyway, that's why. And I don't think it's an invalid writing choice. Like, obviously, Childe has attacked us in the past. He sent Osile after Leeway, and you could argue that, yeah, he thought Rex Lapis would come and save the city. So, like, he wasn't really trying to drown all those people, but, like, he still risked all those people's lives so that, like, he could complete his mission. So yeah, Childe has done some extremely ethically questionable things in the past, or just straight up ethically bad things. But we have spent time with him in the past as well. He followed us around in Labyrinth Warriors, and you could see the Traveler just allowed him to do that for purely practical reasons, because Childe's a good fighter. But, like, we have hung out with him outside of that. Like, we know his family and stuff, and we know he has a family that loves him, and that he, you know, has some good qualities. I guess I was just shocked by how cold the Traveler kind of treats him in this quest, I guess. I mean, we are the only ones searching for him when he goes missing. We're literally the only one in Fontaine who even, like, sort of cares that he's gone. But we still kind of, like, only kind of care. We're not super concerned. I mean, we do say, like, he's strong a lot and he'll be fine. But, like, Traveler, he could be dead. I mean, I'm just saying. But, like, I just think it shows the Traveler's kind of, like, apathetic towards Childe and kind of cold, or whatever you want to call it. And again, I'm not saying this is an invalid writing choice or mistake or anything. Like, it kind of makes sense because, like, we're not that close with Childe, and, like, he did do some really fucked up stuff in the past. But I guess it just surprises me a little bit because the Traveler is usually, like, ooey gooey, lovey-dovey with, like, everyone they fucking meet, but not with him. Like, when Childe is wrongly convicted in the missing disappearance case, the Traveler just, like, doesn't care that much. We clearly aren't super thrilled about the verdict. Like, we're not happy. But we're also not outraged or upset, really. Like, the Traveler isn't like, oh my gosh, Childe, he's been wrongly convicted. Because, like, he has been wrongly convicted. There's no room to argue on that. We literally know who the real culprit is. The true culprit literally confessed to the crimes, and, like, he was supposed to go to jail, but then he got killed on the way by his past victims. But, like, Childe did not disappear any of those women. There's no room to argue that, like, maybe he did it. Like, so no, Childe is just straight up wrongly convicted for a crime he didn't commit. And so he's an innocent man, at least for that charge. And at the end of the second chapter, he's going away to prison, like, possibly forever. Like, because I'm pretty sure it's a life sentence to kill multiple innocent women. So, like, if Childe didn't escape from the fortress, or the Fatui weren't able to negotiate his release, Childe would literally be stuck in the fortress of Mirapede forever, like the rest of his life. He'd never be able to see his siblings again, or his parents, or his homeland, because of something he literally did not do. And the Traveler just, like, doesn't really care that much. It's, like, it's pretty fucked up. And we're, like, the Traveler kind of cares, but, like, not that much. Like, as a player, I love Childe, so I was ready to fight Nervalette to free him. Like, I was like, I can take on that guy to free you, Childe. But the Traveler clearly, like, doesn't care that much about Childe because they don't seem that upset. They're like, oh, you know, that's kind of wrong, maybe, question mark, but, like, I'm sure it's fine. Like, you would think that, like, aside from their personal like or dislike for Childe, just from a sheer moral perspective, they would care more that they just saw an innocent man get convicted of a crime he did not commit with no evidence and no explanation. I mean, they literally have the killer caught and convicted, so it's completely kangaroo court. But the Traveler just, like, isn't that concerned, and they're just kind of, like, vaguely disgruntled about it, but they don't even have, they're not even that passionate. The Traveler does, like, frown and go up to Nervalette and be like, that was kind of wrong. And Nervalette's like, oh yeah, I'll look into it. But, like, Nervalette never does. Like, Nervalette never canonically tries to, like, get justice for Childe. Literally the only reason Childe gets out of prison is because he breaks himself out, and then he fights an alien whale, and then gets chucked into a portal because the writers are retarded. So, without him breaking out, Childe just might still be rotting in prison for a crime he didn't commit if the Fatui weren't able to pressure the Fontainians into a deal for his release over time. So I guess it's, again, not necessarily a writing problem, but I was shocked that the Traveler is just, like, callous and apathetic towards Childe. But then again, yeah, I guess they're not really friends, but it's a little sad because, like, Childe clearly thinks they're friends, but, like, the Traveler just doesn't care about him. And I think, like, I mean, think about it. If any other of the playable characters had been wrongly convicted of a crime like Childe was, I think the Traveler would have moved mountains to help them. But yeah, Traveler just, like, doesn't really care that much about Childe, so that was a choice. A choice I'm not super fond of, but I mean, I guess it's just characterizing the Traveler as a little cold towards Childe, and there's technically nothing wrong with that. I just personally don't like it. And you know what? The Chalumi fans they deserve better. I'm gonna say they deserve better. The Xiaolumi fans are eating good, but the Chalumi fans are crying, and rightfully so. They deserve better, okay? I'm saying it. You guys deserve better. Where's the Chalumi content? It doesn't exist, apparently. Not in the game. Oh, boy. Speaking of Childe's wrongful conviction, why did Childe get convicted in the first place? Okay, so before I entirely move on from this topic, I just wanted to bring up the fact that why Childe is convicted of a crime he did not commit is never properly explained within the quest, even though it's set up as another mystery, like something we should ponder about. You can ask Nervalette about it at the end, but he just kind of gives some bullshit explanation, like maybe Foka wanted him there to fight the whale, or maybe she, like, had reasonings we couldn't understand because she was a goddess. So basically, Nervalette doesn't know, which means the writers don't know. And it's kind of a big mystery setup, but we never get an answer as to why he was convicted, other than Folklores just didn't like him, or maybe she did have a plan to make him fight the whale, but, like, if that's true, that's pretty fucked up. You're going to use a foreigner who has nothing to do with your nation's struggles to fight this whale for your people? Like, maybe just get good instead, Foka. The point is, Foka's literally dead, so she can't explain her reasoning as to why she convicted Childe of a crime he did not commit. So the writers literally killed Foka off, so they didn't have to write an explanation for it. They just wanted Childe to go to the fortress so we could have a reason to go to the fortress to look for him, but, like, that's not a good enough reason. Like, you have to think through your own decision making. In your story, it's not that hard. This is exhausting. The mistake that is Shirk. Pretty much everything I wrote in the even if foreshadowed Foka fuck is a terrible decision or terrible idea section can be copied and pasted here. I don't know about you guys, but Hoiver's let me fight that whale with Nervalette for about 60 seconds tops, even though I could have beaten the thing on my own easily, before Shirk, or as I call her, Skank, appeared and just beat it for us. You guys already know how I feel about random characters we've never met before swooping in out of nowhere and defeating threats that the characters we actually know and like should be defeating is awful. But let me just like it's terrible. But let me give you a quick example of just how cringe this all is and this exact scene is. So, is anyone here into D&D horror stories? Well, if you're not, they're exactly what they sound like. Dungeons and Dragons or other similar role-playing games, they're these stories about D&D games that go horribly, terribly wrong, and then people go on the internet and talk about their terrible experiences because any weird, terrible experience you have in the 21st century just has to be shared. And they're usually entertaining, if cringe-inducing, stories. And one of the most infamous ones, and this is relative to Shirk, I promise, is the story that's generally referred to as the airship story. I know the channel Crick Crab did a video on this, that's where I heard about it, and I'm sure other role-playing channels have talked about it before, maybe. So, basically, to make a long, cringe-inducing story short, it's where this DM, which is the dungeon master, he controls the game, in case you didn't know. There's this DM in the airship story, and he sticks all the players of his game on this airship. And the player characters aren't actually allowed to do anything because of all of the DM's amazing, incredible, one-of-a-kind, spectacular, never-been-seen-before OCs do all the actual adventuring and battling and all the important stuff. The player characters are basically just not allowed to do anything within their own story, and they're just there to, like, prove how OP and amazing and cool the DM's OCs are. And it was a terrible, terrible D&D game, but it was a really funny story. That story is exactly what Shirk feels like when she shows up at the end of the quest. Like, we're the player characters on the airship, and we're excited to beat this big bad guy that's been built up to, like, throughout the entire quest. Not really, but you know my thoughts on the whale, but, like, let's just pretend it was built up. Like, let's pretend this was going to be super epic. I mean, I mean, I would rather have the characters that actually, like, beat this stupid whale than the alternative, which is what actually happened. But anyway, so we're all excited and engaged, and we're ready to make an impact on the story. And then this cool OC girl with this crazy anime outfit and white hair shows up, and she's just like a girl boss, and instantly the best Mary Sue, and she just like instantly defeats the whale, and then she chucks it into a portal. And like, damn, isn't she so cool and powerful? And like, aren't you guys impressed by her? Tell me Shark is not an OC from the airship story. Like, tell me she's not. Actually, I just figured out why the writing was so bad on this chapter. Hoyoverse fired all their old writers and instead hired their sole new writer to be the DM from the airship story. And you know what? That explains so much. Now I know exactly why the story is like this, because his random OCs are just showing up and doing all the cool stuff because that's the way he wants to write it, because he's bad at writing and cringe. So yes, when your character feels like an OC from the airship D&D horror story, just stop and rewrite them and your whole story, please. I really feel like a broken record, but pretty much everything I said about Foka can be applied to Skank too. Both characters appear from nowhere after they've never been foreshadowed. They're ultimately powerful, and they steal the plot and victories from characters we actually care about and have spent time with. They almost share all of the exact same problems, so I'm really not going to bore you by just repeating every single one of them. But know that pretty much everything that was present with Foka is just as badly present within Skank. So, like, yeah. So, Skank, she's just so cool, OP, powerful, and she's just, like, the bad guy that we're gonna have to fight and, you know, like, save all of Fontaine heroically because, like, the authors wrote it this way. Like, yeah, we were gonna, like, have to struggle to fight that enemy, but, like, yeah. Skirk is built different. So she just, like, instantly defeats it, and she's like, oh, yeah, that whale was just, like, my master's pet. And, like, I didn't even break a sweat defeating it. I can just do it, like, instantly without even trying, because, like, I'm just built different. Like, one, I cannot think of anything more cringe and obviously tone deaf than having Skank call the whale her master's pet, and in doing so, effectively making light of the entire situation. I mean, that's actually super fucked up of her because, yeah, her master's pet almost killed, like, hundreds of thousands of people, and Skirk just, like, doesn't seem that concerned about that, which, you know, is horrible. And her also, like, letting the audience know that the big bad we were supposed to fight to save Fontaine was her master's pet. That got a little rowdy, you know? Like, why are you mad? It was just a little rowdy. It obviously and infuriatingly just trivializes the entire quest, basically. So it's the only thing that the Traveler, the player character, even does in the story that actually matters, really, is fight the whale. Like, we literally do nothing else that actually matters or changes the outcome of the story throughout the entire rest of the quest, and we can't even fight the whale because this is too cool and badass. So some stupid ass cringe OC girl shows up and does it for us, and in the process trivializes the entire conflict of the whale retroactively by, she has to let us know that the big bad we were going to defeat is just her master's pet. The Traveler and the other characters I actually care about get to literally do nothing throughout this entire quest because of these OP girl bosses. They just keep showing up and doing everything, and the thanks, I hate it. The writers who wrote this 5th chapter need to be tried, jailed, and sentenced to death. Please and thank you. That is a joke. Obviously, I do not want them to die. But like the Fortress of Mirapede, that's on the table. Let's be real. Send them down there. So, is the Knave a good guy or what? So when I first saw the Knave, I thought she was so cool. I was like, she's so sinister, yet collected and reserved. She radiates danger. And I was like, this is great. I thought she was going to be the next best villain, like the next Eldo Tori Slay. And like the writers had this really good thing going where she was kind of like this morally gray character, but she also runs an organization that forces orphans to do dangerous mission for an elite military power while pretending to be their father/mother figure. So yeah, maybe not pure Eldotori experiment on kids for fun villain, but like still a villain. Obviously, that's pretty non-negotiable. But Hoyoverse was like, is it negotiable? And I was like, no, what are you talking about? She's clearly a cool villain, and I can't wait to fight her at the end of this quest. And Hoyoverse was like, you know what you want to fight instead at the end of this quest? What? A giant alien whale! And I was like, no, what the fuck? Why would you think I want that? And they were like, we know you want the alien whale. And I was like, no, no one wants that. And they were like, too bad, so sad. Maybe if you went out and touched grass, you wouldn't have to see the alien whale. Regardless, I want to keep this section pretty short and sweet because obviously, like, the pain of making this video never ends. But obviously, I thought the Knave was going to be a super cool villain and, like, be morally layered and not complete evil, but definitely still, evil and definitely somebody we need to stop. And there's even the whole scene at the beginning of the quest in Chapter 1 where Lenny is trying really hard to convince us that he hasn't been groomed to be a spy for a military power when his alternative was to be an orphan and have his sister be sold into sex slavery. So I was like, wow, Lenny, you are really convincing me that you were not groomed with this story. I totally believe you were not groomed into doing this with that explanation. But I thought what was interesting was like the Knave does seem to care for these orphans, but they're also her tools. And what she has them do for her in the Fatui is morally wrong. Period. It's not debatable. I mean, the House of the Hearth use and groom vulnerable orphans to become espionage agents as expendable pawns to the Chesnayan nation. Lenny and Lynette have almost died several separate times on various missions that they completed, and they were probably relatively young when those missions took place. We don't have an exact age for how old Lenny and Lynette are now. But if you guess max, they're like 18 or 19 now, because Risley refers to them as children, so they could be even younger. They could be like 16 or 17 years old. Now, is it weird they would have an underage characters dressed like them? Yes. So that's why I'm going to choose to believe they're 18, because otherwise things are getting very uncomfortable. But anyway, let's assume they're 18 now. If Risley's an older man, he'd probably still consider an 18-year-old a kid, although there is a possibility that they are still younger now. So we hear about multiple dangerous missions that they went on while they were younger. And so those missions, if they're 18 now, they were probably around 15, 16 years old. And those missions that are described in their CP stories are like near fatal situations where like they almost died. So what the House of the Hearth is not moral. It's not up for debate. Grooming orphans to be military agents is not correct. Now, you could argue some of these children have no better options and like they're just going to stay on the street and be abused by more people if they're not taken in by the House of the Hearth. So, what the House of the Hearth does is morally complex. Like, they're not just using the orphans as expendable pawns, and the Knave does is genuinely seem to care for the children, at least to some degree. And I agree with some of that. But it doesn't make what she does right. And it's still wrong. Period. So I was excited for her as a villain. I was excited to fight her because once again, she's definitely committed crimes worthy of, a fight. But maybe we could like change her mind and get her to stop using the children as pawns, but rather just let them be children. But the story just kind of presents her in the end as morally in the right and morally not complex. She's just presented as pretty much a good guy that we pretty much get along with and we're going to collaborate again with in the future. And I know the Knave does obviously do some good stuff in this quest, like she's literally providing aid to the places that were damaged by the flood, but she literally admits in the quest that she's doing this, and I respect her for her honesty. It's not completely out of like altruism, the goodness of her heart. She's doing it because there's stuff in it for her and for the Fatui. So I don't want her to be a soulless bad guy. On the contrary, I thought the complexity was what made her a great villain. But I'm just disappointed that by the end of the quest, the writers basically tried to portray her as a good guy, and there's no implication that we're going to fight her in the future or that our relationship is tense and a score needs to be settled. There's really no moral questions raised about her literally grooming orphans so that they do dangerous military and spying operations for the Fatui. So yeah, thanks. I hate it. I just hate it. And I think it's a wasted opportunity. And I'm not sure why the Hoyoverse writers think using orphans as military operatives is okay, because the House of the Hearth members are groomed into doing military operations for the Fatui. That's not up for debate. It's indisputable. It's just canon. And I find it very disappointing. And I do hope that the writers kind of like change up the way she's been portrayed up to this point, and they do put us in conflict with the Knave in the future so that we can fight her. Because again, I like the Knave as a villain, and I think she would be interesting and cool, and I don't want her to just be boring, pure evil, but I want to confront her for the things that she needs to be confronted for, and maybe again get her to change, kind of like how Childe and Mushi have changed over time, but like they still needed to be fought and confronted so that they could change and grow. So yeah, that's what I think I'm saying.
Wait, didn't I just play this? Now my blood vomits at the sheer disrespect that any one person would need to have to compare the great storytelling of the Sumeru Archon quest to this pile of dog crap, but I would be doing a great disservice to you to not point out that Hoyoverse is recycling their own story ideas and recreating shitty, awful, worthless regurgitations of them. In the Sumeru Archon quest, which is brilliant by the way, or at least very good, a newer, younger Archon has to destroy a past, older, more divine and experienced version of herself to save her nation and people from ruin. In the Fontaine Archon quest, a newer, younger Archon has to help with the plan so that a past, older, more divine and experienced version of herself can destroy herself to save her nation and people from ruin. Yeah, Hoyover's basically just did their own story again, but worse. In fact, once you see the similarities between these quest plot beats, you can't unsee them. Traveler arrives in a strange land and meets a helpful boy and girl companion who make several appearances throughout the quest. In Sumeru, Tainari and Calais. Fontaine, Linny and Lynette. Traveler has to solve a mystery about the status quo of the land. Sumeru, what's up with the divine knowledge capsules and what's up with the academia? Fontaine, what's up with the Oratrace and what's up with Farina and what's up with the flood? The traveler encounters two separate Fatui harbingers and their travelers throughout the lands. Traveler meets up with characters both within the organization under investigation and outsiders to team up to beat the big bad guy. In Sumeru, Alhaitham and Sino to some extent are within the academia, while Dia is outside the academia and they're investigating the academia. And in Fontaine, Nervalette is inside the Fontaine government controlled by Farina, who's under investigation, and Risley and Navia are outside the Fontainian government. And again, literally circling back to the almost identical endings and what actually happens. And some of these connections are kind of stretching, but some I really think not. Also, I think Nervalette is basically just Zhongli in water cosplay. Both are distinguished, long-winded, well-cultured gentlemen with long hair and long robes who are actually ancient, incredibly powerful beings who contemplate big questions like what are their roles within their respective societies, and also have a softer, zanier side as well. Those two are like, can I copy your homework? Sure, just change it up a little bit so they won't notice. Listen, this isn't my strongest point, but I do think, and I would be remiss to not mention the strong similarities, including again, literally the endings of the quest that like are the same. Like these two things are similar. And except in the Sumer request, all these plot beats are done well, while in Fontaine, well, you know how this video's been going. What does this quest say about justice? In Genshin, one of the cooler things about the Archon quest is that each one makes commentary and analyzes the respective ideals of the Archon of that land. In the very first Archon quest, Barbados is the Archon of freedom, and yet Dvalin poses the question of what does someone do with that freedom, and can freedom be a bad thing? Would some people benefit from more structure versus just pure freedom? As being entirely free, aka without leadership, Venti just chilling in the ground for hundreds of years at a time leaves people open to corruption from outside or inside forces that are corrosive. This is represented in this day and age through the Abyss's influence over Dvalin, and in the past, the aristocrats taking over Mondstadt and enslaving people. I think it's a very interesting commentary and yet subtle, so on the surface, it's just a fun quest about saving a dragon in a city. I also think it's a telling conclusion that not enough people talk about, that Venti does not return back to slumber when the quest is completed, and as of the making of this video, he has remained ever present and watchful, shepherding over Mondstadt and his subjects and friends, presently and watchfully ever since the events of the Archon quest of Mondstadt. In Liyue, the idea of contracts and agreements is analyzed and dissected. The Adepti have made an agreement to protect Liyue, but when they believe the Keqing have killed Rex Lapis, they threaten to wipe out Liyue and start anew. Is Liyue a place or a people? The leaders of Liyue have also made a contract with the people of Liyue to keep them safe. Zhongli has served Liyue faithfully for almost 6,000 years. The questions of when is a contract fulfilled? When is it okay to step back from your duties? And in the final contract, Zhongli gives his gnosis over to the Fatui. The question is raised, when is it okay to give up power? When is a job truly done? In Inazuma, I would say that this is the weakest the Genshin writers have ever done up to this point in dissecting the ideas of the themes of the region, but it's still there. The theme of Inazuma is eternity and what that idea means. A thinks it means that time and things in general must remain still, and as if they move forward, then endless pain and suffering will just ensue. With every step forward, something is lost. Only when time stands still can the lightning shine forth. But this idea is challenged and throughout the quest, and she sees that humans cannot be stopped and that progress in time cannot be stopped, and some things like the spirit of her people will remain the same strong even as time change and pass. Inazuma's dissection of the theme of eternity is the weakest of the original four Archon quests, I would say, but it's passable enough, I think. It's just a little simple in its analysis. Sumeru, on the other hand, brilliantly discusses its themes of wisdom, pride, arrogance, and superficiality as it raises the question of what it truly means to be wise and to seek wisdom. The sages are arrogant and superficial. To them, it is more important to feel wise than to actually be wise, which is why their pride can't stand their Archon looking like a little child who they perceive as ignorant and weak and unimpressive. So they chase false wisdom in the false god Scaramouche, radiating toward his big talk and his big mechanical body and his sheer impressiveness. But as we see throughout the quest, it is Nahida, the small, weak, unassuming child, who actually demonstrates true wisdom, benevolence, and kindness, despite the fact that she was cast away, much like Scaramouche was. In that way, them both being abandoned and put aside for others, they make brilliant foils to one another. As Scaramouche's only motivation to become the new god of wisdom is to elevate himself, amass power, become mighty and impressive to prove that those who rejected him in the past, that he is worthy, in that endless quest for more power and more impressiveness, he actually forgets to try and become wise. While Nahida, on the other hand, who was also rejected and tossed aside by others, only goes to take her rightful place as goddess when other malevolent actors attempting to take that position themselves hurt her people and damage her nation. It is only then that she steps forth and into the role of goddess of wisdom, using her brains, not her brawn, or overwhelming Archon powers to defeat the false god and save her people. The quest's commentary on wisdom, pride, arrogance, and superficiality are absolutely genius in my opinion, and once again, the vast majority of this is not in your face, but rather beneath the surface. In fact, the writing uses show not tell so well that it got people to discuss, even if they did not realize it at the time, its themes before the quest officially came out. When Nahida's design was leaked before the Archon quest came out, a lot of people voiced their disappointment in her design, saying she didn't look impressive or like a goddess of wisdom because she was, a child. I myself was also admittedly in that camp. Nahida did not fit my idea of what a goddess of wisdom should look like, and that's her whole point. She looks like that not because Hoyoverse thought a leaf nature child would look cool, but rather because it's important to the narrative's themes that she looks that way. Even before the quest started, the community was judging Nahida on her superficial appearance, not able to accept her because of their preconceived notions on what she should look like, just like the sages did. Ugh, the whole quest is just chef's kiss from start to finish. I really, really love it. I really doubted the Fontaine Archon quest would be able to top Sumeru's, not because I thought Fontaine's quest would be especially bad, which I was very, very disappointed to find out its ending at least was, but rather because I did not think it could reach the sheer heights that Sumeru reached, and I sadly was very, very right. Fontaine, as a complete whole narrative from start to finish, can't even touch Inazuma's narrative, which wasn't exactly Hoyoverse's most flawless project. The purpose of all of that was to show how the other regions' Archon quests discussed their themes to, in general, a very thoughtful high degree. So with all of that out of the way, let's see what Fontaine has to say about justice.
I don't know, they didn't talk about it. You may think I'm pulling your leg, I'm not. Tell me, what exactly did the Fontaine Archon quest say about justice? Tell me, what did they? We will get to the most obvious interpretation in a second, but let's start off with what they didn't talk about. Why was the opera trial performance angle even there if they weren't going to talk about it? One of the very first things the players learn upon the traveler arriving in Fontaine, literally it's from one of the very first NPCs you talk to in the harbor, explains that Fontainians view trials as performances. They use them for entertainment. In the same place they host magic shows, they try criminals for heinous crimes for enthralled, titillated crowds. Murderers, kidnappers, rapists, heck, child rapists are tried in front of an audience of people primarily there for drama and entertainment. This morally objectionable fact is brought up a few times within the quest, but nothing is ever really said or condemned about it. It's just kind of like a thing, and after the quest is over, Fontaine justice will continue to be conducted in the same theatrical way, even though I must emphasize to you again, these trials are not theater plays. There are real people's lives, and those real people's lives are being destroyed, torn apart, having their privacy deeply violated on the Tava equivalent of live TV. I mean, Genshin never goes there, but then again, Lynette is basically sold into sex trafficking before being saved, so who knows? But sexual abuse victims in Fontaine, in canon to this day, have to testify about their sexual abuse in the opera house in front of an audience of gawkers and journalists who are there primarily for entertainment. As far as we know, every single trial in Fontaine goes through the opera house. In fact, we know that is the case because of the oratrice who actually makes the final verdict in all trials, not Nervalette, as seen in Chapter 2. So we know that every single trial goes through the opera house. Now, since the oratrice is destroyed, it is possible that some change may occur to their legal system, but Nervalette never tells us that he's planning to make any changes to their legal system, so we have no reason to believe that anything will change going forward. The horrors and moral disgustingness of their system of justice is never particularly questioned or challenged in any meaningful way throughout the quest, and that's a serious shame because I think there are some pretty obvious parallels towards how justice is often done and perceived in real life, and how journalists, social media, YouTubers, and everyday people turn serious and grave criminal trials into simple gossip and entertainment, regardless of and callous towards the real victims, the victims' families and loved ones, and or those falsely accused of crimes. There is some real poignant, hard-hitting commentary you can make in that regard. And we're almost there, especially with Linny's trial. An innocent man who is a member of the House of the Hearth and is considered an outsider and strange man within Fontanian society is accused of murder he did not commit simply because he was the most convenient target there, even though there was a lack of any hard, real evidence. And his trial of an innocent man's life almost being destroyed is gawked and gossiped over by the Fontanian audience in the stands, but once again, we never truly get any commentary on that front. It's just kind of like a thing that happens in the quest, which is a serious shame, as I think the writers were close to some incredible commentary there. They seem to have all the pieces set up to do just that, and then they just don't take it. It's truly a terrible waste. And okay, yes, that's just one route of commentary they could have gone down when analyzing the broader theme of justice. They didn't have to go that route just because I would have liked it. And they set up the pieces for it themselves. Doesn't mean they had to go that route. There were other options. So let's talk about the next most obvious angle that they had set up for themselves to talk about the justice in Fontaine and the themes of justice as a whole. Childe and mob justice. Okay, so in the Fontaine Archon quest, we aren't talking about the commodification, exploitation, and sensationalism of real criminal trials and crimes and victims. Okay, there's another route. There's other routes that we could go about doing. One of the routes that, once again, it feels like the writers were already setting up the pieces to talk about was the idea of mob justice. This especially already felt set up considering how the Oratrice works is by weighing the opinion of the crowd. Yeah, I feel like that's just kind of stated and glossed over, but literally what the Oratrice measures is if the crowd basically believes one lawyer more than the other, like who they think is guilty. But what I think is glossed over and what a lot of viewers don't realize is like that's obviously not real justice. All that proves is which lawyer is more persuasive. And yes, maybe having more evidence in your case helps you be more persuasive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is true justice if one lawyer just happens to be more persuasive than the other. A great example of this is literally in the first trial we partake in, we defend Linny as he is brought to trial without any super clear evidence to tie him to the crime. Farina just thinks he did it and the crowd tends to agree with her. The only reason it turns out well for Linny is the Traveler, through main character powers, is able to outmaneuver Farina and prove that Linny was innocent. But what if the Traveler hadn't been able to do that? Which, like, canonically, realistically, the Traveler probably shouldn't have been able to do that because Farina has 500 more years of studying trials and being immersed in the courthouse every single day and possibly even representing other people. We don't really know. So the point is, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that Farina could have outmaneuvered the Traveler and been more persuasive to the crowd, even though Linny wasn't actually guilty. Linny didn't disappear that woman. But regardless of that, the Oratrice measures how the crowd feels, and so if Farina was a better orator and the Traveler was a little more stupid, the Oratrice very easily could have convicted Linny and sent him to the Fortress of Meropide probably for the rest of his life, even though he's an innocent man. And this fact is hammered home once again when Childe is wrongly convicted in the second chapter. Just straight up, there is no evidence of that possibly being him committing the crime. They have the real murderer behind bars already who confessed to everything and is proven to have done all the murders. So when Childe was originally convicted, it's kind of set up as a mystery, and if this was a normal frickin' story that made sense, we would have gotten a payoff for it. And I thought the payoff was going to be relatively simple, actually. I thought the payoff was just going to be how the Oratrice was already explained to us. I thought the explanation for why Childe was convicted in the first place was going to be that most of the Fontaine people in the audience just thought Childe was guilty. Not guilty of that specific crime, because once again, they all saw the evidence that the other guy did it, but they just felt that he was more guilty in a general sense, basically. He was a guilty person. Childe is Fatui. He's a harbinger of the Fatui. He's a foreigner. He's kind of a big, intimidating guy with a brash way of speaking. And so I thought the reason he was convicted was not because of Focalore's bullshit, but rather because the people of Fontaine just perceived Childe to be a guilty person, and therefore the Oratrice, who measures only people's feelings, really, and technically amasses enough power for a god-level atomic bomb or whatever. But at that point in the story, the Oratrice had only been explained to us by those rules, and I'm pretty sure those were still the rules it followed for the trials before it, exploded. And I thought the people of Fontaine just thought that Childe was a guilty person. He just seemed like a bad guy, and maybe they had heard of some of his other deeds in the past. And the people in the crowd were like, nah, he's guilty. We don't want him running around our country. So the Oratrice read their feelings and sent him to prison. And that's obviously unjust. And I thought that was the point, that what had happened to Childe was mob justice, that it was basically someone being quote unquote convicted without actually being guilty, being treated as guilty without a real trial, basically. And once again, there's a lot of really impactful, relevant social commentary that you can make about such a point, especially in our age of social media and, people coming to conclusions about something before they have all the information. Just believing the first thing they see about something and then judging someone as insert bad word here before having the full story. And that could just be entirely false information that they were fed, or that this person is just someone that they don't like in the first place, and so they jump to they're guilty of this crime, even though that's not really true. It's just someone's preconceived notions about the person they don't like being guilty. It's not because there's actual evidence that the person in question committed the crime. So there's some pretty obvious, honestly very relevant commentary that you could make about justice in our age and the misuse of mob justice. I mean, again, it seems like they're setting up for a pretty clear idea here of what the commentary on justice is going to be about, but no, 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 no. This is the Fontaine Archon quest. This is chapter 5 of the Fontaine Archon quest, and that means it's got to be asked from start to finish. So there is no other way to say this, but they don't talk about this at all, this theme of mob justice and people's feelings being more important to them than facts. They don't talk about that kind of thing at all. None of that is commented on, even though all the pieces are in place for there to be some kind of commentary about it right there. And once again, they don't take an opportunity right in front of them that they set the pieces for themselves, and I find that to be a serious waste. Okay, so if the writers are not talking about the sensationalization of justice, how real justice turned into entertainment for the masses, and if they're not talking about mob justice and how people can easily be quote unquote convicted of something they didn't actually do because of people's general perception of them or their unpopularity, then what are we talking about here? What does the Fontaine Archon quest have to say about justice, the theme of the entire region? Give the Indians their land back. Apparently. Okay, this is a low-key a joke because, obviously this is from an American point of view. I have no idea what it's like in China. I'm pretty sure the Chinese are the indigenous people of that land, and they've just always been there or whatever. So obviously that's tongue-in-cheek. But the theme that they go with, I think, is very odd. And once again, I wouldn't have an issue if it was thoroughly explored or done right, because once again, you can't really knock a story. I think it's actually ingenuous to do so by basically being like, I don't like this story because it's not what I would have done. I don't think that's fair critique. At that point, someone's judging not what's actually there, but what they want to be there. And that's actually one of my biggest pet peeves of criticism. So I'm not doing that. I don't have any problem with what they picked. I just took you through multiple options that I thought there were ideas presented, or at least pieces of ideas presented within the quest, and routes of commentary that I thought the writers could have gone down. But if they didn't want to go down those routes I previously mentioned, it's fine. I just, one, think they probably should have removed those elements from the story, or at least minimized them so the audience wasn't confused and didn't think there was going to be commentary when the writers have no intention of commenting on anything. And also, if they weren't going to pick those themes, they have to thoroughly commit to another theme, so we're not left wondering what the theme even is or what the commentary we're supposed to take from the story is. So, in my opinion, and I'm open to other explanations. If you have another explanation that isn't complete cope, put it in the comments. If it's complete cope, keep that to yourself, okay? In my opinion, the only true theme that you can take about justice from this insane quest is that native people who have had their land or power taken away from outside usurpers, either outside colonialists, foreigners, whoever, and this sounds insane, I know, to be talking about an a Genshin quest of all things, should be given the power and land that was stolen from them back to them, and they should be allowed to rule over the structures that are in place now within that land. So this message is both a progressive's wet dream and also a progressive's nightmare, because I feel like listen, Nervalet is given back his full power from Focalors, and it was taken from him. And Focalors was an outside usurper, and he's the native man who rightfully owns this power in this land. So it seems like the message is very progressive and like returning land and power to those that have had it stolen from them from indigenous people. Which, like, again, I'm not really sure if this was intended. Is this the theme or not? Because I'm going to be entirely honest, I'm pretty ignorant about Chinese history, and I'm not really sure what the message is like from a Chinese perspective, because Hoyoverse is obviously Chinese, and I'm not Chinese, and I don't even know anyone from China, so, like, I really don't know what's going on, and I don't know how this theme would be interpreted from a Chinese perspective. But at the same time, Nervalet is empowered once again. So it kind of seems like the theme is give the Indians their land back. I don't really know. Like, I'd be super interested to hear, like I said, from a Chinese perspective on what the story is trying to say, because again, I don't know Chinese politics or Chinese history other than like the most basic shit they teach us in world history class in like 7th grade in America, which is about like all the dynasties and cycles and stuff like that. And I don't really remember anything about like indigenous people having their land stolen, unless like the Chinese, I know they were conquered at points by other groups, but like, is Nervalet supposed to represent the Chinese or like what? I don't know. I feel like I'm walking on very uncomfortable territory right now because I feel very uneducated because I don't know what this quest is trying to say. And it's also like, while it's insanely progressive on the surface, at the same time, it's not, because Nervalet is empowered once again, but he's only able to get his power and authority and control of the land returned to him once he's fully assimilated and accepted the current system that was set up by the oppressors, and he succeeded within that system. And I know I sound like a crazy liberal here, but like, you can look at my other stuff. I'm not a liberal, I'm a hardcore conservative, but that is the kind of message that's there. It's basically like Nervalet gets his power back, but he only gets that power back once he's excelled within the system that the outsiders have created within his native lands. And then once he does get his power back, he's not really allowed to change anything about the systems he's inherited. He has to maintain the status quo. So, I also admit I may be taking this too literally or historically. Like, maybe Hoyoverse isn't trying to talk about any real historical people or anything like that, which, like, yeah, I'm guessing they're not making a one-to-one comparison. It could just be the theme is more of a general theme. It's something like, if someone has something unfairly taken from them, it should be returned to them. Like, I don't know, if someone's car was stolen, it should be returned to them. Or like, if the bank wrongly forecloses on someone's home, the house should be returned to them. But that feels like very kiddie and like not entirely accurate to me, because there's very charged language in this quest that Nervalet uses, like usurper, and Nervalet rightfully owns this land because he's from this land, and there are outside foreign oppressors who have appropriated the primordial sea and they don't understand it. And like, yeah, there's just a lot of charged language, and it makes me think like, give the Indians their land back. Like, that's what it makes me think of. But again, I fully admit I'm an American. I don't understand the complexities of Chinese history. I don't understand if this is supposed to be a metaphor for anything in China or throughout Chinese history or politics or anything. I mean, I kind of doubt Hoyoverse would make their story have an outright political message anyway, considering Chinese entertainment has a very different relationship with their governments than the American entertainment systems do. So I'm not really sure. It could be a thing that like is not supposed to be thought of very much. Like, it could be the case that there is no theme that's being discussed. It could be just a story about a fictional dragon that had aliens come and take his land, and then the aliens gave the land back to him, and it's like not supposed to mean anything at all. But all stories have a meaning, even stories that aren't trying to like quote unquote say anything. Because once you read into the text, and like you don't even have to read that deep, it's just like, what is the story about? What is considered a happy ending? Who are considered the villains? All of this is communication to the audience, even if it's not intended to be deep or to have deep themes. Telling a story is a form of communication. Even in the most basic children's shows, where there's not a lot happening, the heroes use friendship and teamwork to defeat the bad guys. And the themes of the story usually are like friendship and teamwork are positive things that you should emulate in your own life. Like, that is one of the messages that children absorb from their TV shows. So even if a story is not very deep or isn't trying to say anything, there are still themes that can be read out of the story and that are present in the narrative. So, I'm just a little baffled. And once again, if any progressive is doing a little booty dance, it's like, oh gosh, yes, give the Indians back their land or give oppressed people back their land that was colonized or whatever. I once again want to remind you that Nervalet is only allowed to have his land and power back once he's fully assimilated and excelled within the system set up for him by the foreigners. And he's only allowed to take power back once he fully accepts the outsider's system and way of life. And he's not going to change anything when he gets back into power. And only then, once he's accepted their system and he's not going to change their system, is he rewarded with his own power back. Also, when Nervalet gets his power returned, he does everything that the outside oppressors want him to do. He does everything that Focalors wants. And I'm not knocking him for that. I'm not saying he should have let the Fontainians be killed. That would be horrible. But I don't know. It's just a lot to think about. And I think the story's themes are confused and not clear. And there are, of course, stories where the themes aren't shouted out to you and you have to actually be thoughtful and think about what you've consumed to figure out what the work is trying to say, which I appreciate. But as I've been thinking about this quest, I've been analyzing it. It's been weeks that it's been ruminating in my mind. And I don't think it's deep. I just think it's confused. I just don't get what they were trying to say. The message seems muddled. It seems odd. It also seems to be not focused upon that much in the quest because, once again, if Hoyvers wanted to go full lib, have Nervalet be this oppressed person and these foreigners have come in and have taken his land and power, and that land and power needs to be rightfully restored to him, they had an entire quest, so many hours of my life, to make me sympathize with Nervalet and, make me see how the foreigners came in and, massacred the dragons or stole his land and make me sympathize with his plight as an oppressed person and make me understand what getting his power back would mean to him as a person. I went over this in some detail before in my Nervalet section, but when he gets his power back, I felt nothing because him getting his powers back or not having his powers or having his land stolen or having outside oppressors come in and usurp the dragons as controllers of Teyvat, it's not really focused upon in the Fontaine quest at all. It's just kind of thrown in there as a way for the plot to be solved, and we don't get any thoughtful commentary about what it means for Nervalet to have his power be restored. We don't get any details about, the Archons coming to Teyvat originally and their war with the dragons, if they even had a war. I'm literally unsure because I'm not reading 5 billion artifact sets to understand the lore because that's bad storytelling. So yeah, if all this stuff about land repossession and defranchised people being re-empowered was supposed to be the theme, it wasn't focused upon really at all and given almost no commentary or focus in the story, so it was a failure. Yeah. Basically, I'm trying to say that whatever Fontaine is trying to say about justice, if anything, the writing was so confused, contrived, and just plain phoned in, and insane and incomprehensible in places. Whatever theme they were trying to say does not come across. I mean, it's so bad, the writing is so awful that I would not be shocked if they were trying to say nothing. The writers literally forgot that in every single Archon quest before this point, they had commentary about the theme of that region. But the writing's so bad here that I would not be shocked if the writers just forgot that that was something they were supposed to do. So we have two options. One, the quest wasn't trying to say anything because it was just incomprehensible nonsense at the end of the day. And that is what I suspect, honestly, because it was just so poorly written. I mean, it's almost unbelievable how bad it is. I mean, we're 43 pages into this strip and we're still going strong. Two, on the other hand, I'm not sure if this is better or worse, I guess it might be actually worse, is that the writers wanted to have this message about peoples whose land and power were taken away by outsiders getting restored their land and power and kind of getting back what was originally theirs, but within the confines of them succeeding in assimilating fully into the new system that's been put in place. And if that was the message that they were going to go with, I really do not think that message is very well conveyed or explored. I mean, I really had to struggle to think through what the writers were trying to say with Nervalet because, I mean, once again, it's just straight up not talked about for 99% of the Archon quest. There's nothing about people getting stripped of their land or power or outsiders coming in and oppressing them. I mean, you could make an argument that Celestia is an outsider and they're coming in to punish Fontaine by wiping them away with seawater, but that's kind of a stretch and is not really similar to what the dragons went through with the outsiders coming in and warring for their land and winning and taking over. So I don't really know. this is just bad writing. I personally think it's so muddled and confused, the meanings you can read out of it are unintentional. I personally think it wasn't intended to have any meaning at all because the writers literally forgot to analyze justice in the nation of justice. And that's a big yikes for me. A big yikes. So, what did you all think? Was this horrible? Was this horrible and endless for you as it was for me? Well, if it was, thank you for sticking around anyway, because I'm sure this is multiple hours long. I'm not entirely sure as of writing the script or even recording the audio. I wouldn't know until it's done, but I'm horrified already. I'm scared. I'm quaking because I just did a 4-hour plus video on my channel. It's about ranking the Genshin character designs. Check it out if you want to. Shameless plug. And I was like, you know what? I should do a short video for my next video so it's easier for my YouTube channel. But then the 5th chapter of the Fontaine Archon quest came out, and it was just so bad. It was so bad. And like, I know parts of this video were angry, some were funny, some were kind of like accepting. But like, all jokes aside, it's sad to even say this, but I was incredibly disappointed in this quest, all honesty, no cap. And even saying those words makes me sad because it's easier just to be like, lol, it was so horrible and all the writers are idiots, which I mean, they are. And the story was awful. It sucks so bad. But I think it sucks even more because the first 4 chapters actually stand by the fact that I think they're pretty good overall. I think there's a few minor plot holes in them and a few minor issues. But on the whole, I was really enjoying the first 4 chapters. They were restoring my faith in the writer's ability, and they had me very excited and invested in the story and where it was going. And like, this is low-key embarrassing now, but like, I'd stay up awake at night thinking about like, how's the story going to conclude, and like, what's going to happen to my favorite characters, and like, will they be able to avert the prophecy? And then the ending came out, and like, I really just couldn't believe what I was playing through because it was just that bad. Like, so horrible, so awful. Like, compared to the Inazuma ending, like, this is so bad. It makes Inazuma's ending look like a masterpiece. Absolutely no cap. And like, I didn't know we judged Inazuma's ending so harshly because Inazuma's ending is not brilliant by any means, but this is just so bad in comparison. Inazuma looks just amazing. I mean, this ending is catastrophic. I actually don't think we've ever seen anything close to this. Just honestly, I'm not even sure I've seen it in just all media, this amount of failure. The only thing that can come to my mind is the ending of Attack on Titan, which is a choice, and the 5th season finale of Miraculous Ladybug, which is awful and possibly kills everyone in the entire show and replaces them with clones that have their memories. So, like, if I have to compare the ending of your story to the end of Attack on Titan, which has an infamous ending, and the Miraculous Season 5 ending, I mean, you've just done fucked up. You fucked up, man. I don't know what else to say. And the thing that makes it even more shocking is the 5th chapter of the Fontaine quest. It might actually be worse than those 2 other endings. The Attack on Titan ending is infamous for a reason. It's very bad, but I believe it's at least coherent. I don't agree with it at all. I think the author has some really strange ideas about how violence is inevitable and other weird-ass crazy shit, but like, at least the man had a vision, and there's a few things that are like plot holes and plot conveniences and characters do things that don't make sense, but in the end, I feel like it wasn't a complete catastrophe from start to finish in terms of story structure. It's just kind of like the author of Attack on Titan made the choices that literally no one else on earth would have made or wanted, and that's how he decided to end his show. And like, that was a choice. It was a hot take. But at least I understand the events that happened in the show. Like, I literally understand what happened. The bar is so low. And then the Miraculous Ladybug finale of season 5 is probably worse in terms of how much I hate it, because like I said, literally the author may have killed every single character and replaced them with a clone. And the fact that like that's also possibly true is terrible. So again, I think I hate the MLB ending more because they may have killed all my favorite characters and replaced them with clones. But I do think that the finale of MLB is more comprehensible than the Fontaine Archon Quest Chapter 5, because, I mean, almost every single part of this 5th chapter makes no sense. I mean, this script is over 50 pages, and there are sections of this essay where I talked about how choices that were made in the storytelling, not that I wouldn't have made them, and how I think they weren't very good. I did talk about those. But there were also big chunks of this essay where I just talked about how the basic story is just not understandable, and about how the authors do not do the most basic thing in storytelling, which is communicate ideas clearly. And like when I literally don't understand the most important choice in the entire quest, which is Voka's choice to kill herself and give Nervalette the power. And again, that is the most important choice in the entire quest, even though it comes out of fucking nowhere. That's obviously a serious problem. That's what I mean. Like the MLB season 5 finale, I hate with a burning passion, but at least I understand the events that took place. And like that is so sad. I even have to say that because it really shows how low the bar is. And I've never seen a story like this before. Not in a book, a movie, a video game. Just the fact that I have experienced the story and the author just did not explain huge chunks of it to me is so baffling and is so extremely disappointing. So it's easier to hide behind my anger and kind of be like, the writers are idiots, you know? And I do think they are very clearly untalented. But I was actually very disappointed. And it's crazy because I've never seen anything like this in a movie, a book, a video game, where huge chunks of the story is just not explained. But I mean, it is what it is now, I guess. And coming full circle, I started this video with a clip of me in my last Genshin commentary video talking about how I hope moving forward the Archon quest in Fontaine will be good. But I no longer believe that will be the case. That's actually the line after the one I chose. But if you go back and watch that video, I say that. I say, oh, Fontaine, I hope it's good, but I no longer believe that it will be good. As we close out the video, I have to tell you that I do still hope that going forward, the Archon quest will be good. But now I know that that will not be the case. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Have a good day. God loves you. You're special. Jesus died for your sins. Bye.